Matthew chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Brothers and sisters, some of you are doing right and it still feels wrong. You told the truth at work and were sidelined. You stayed faithful in your vows and felt taken for granted. You forgave when you could have humiliated and it looked like you lost. You chose sobriety and the party moved without you. You returned the wallet and still couldn't pay rent. Doing right can feel like stepping into a wind that pushes hard against your chest while the crowd sails the other way. Jesus does not hide that wind. He names it, blesses you in it, and points you through it. He says there is a kingdom whose gates swing open to people who look foolish for a moment because they chose to be faithful for a lifetime. He lifts your eyes from the applause that fades to the crown that does not. Let's be honest. Sometimes obedience hurts in real time. You keep the book straight and get labeled difficult. You refuse revenge, and your silence is mistaken for weakness. You serve behind the scenes, and no one notices, except the one who said, "Your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Brothers and sisters, right now is not forever. Heaven has a longer memory than earth has headlines. There's a fisherman I think about when right feels wrong. Luke chapter 5, verse 5. Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word, I will let down the nets. Simon is exhausted, competent, and empty-handed. He knows these waters. He knows when the fish are not biting. And then the carpenter tells the fisherman how to fish. To obey here is to risk embarrassment in front of the crew. But at your word, those 3 words become the hinge of a life. The nets strain, and a future apostle steps out of a boat. He thought he understood. When doing right feels wrong, the question is not, does it feel productive? But whose word am I trusting? Hear me. Obedience is not a lever to pull for instant outcomes. It is a liturgy that forms a faithful heart. You don't forgive because it will make tomorrow easy. You forgive because Jesus forgave you yesterday, today, and forever. You don't tell the truth because it will guarantee promotion. You tell the truth because you follow the one who is the truth. You don't love your enemy because they're safe. You love because Luke chapter 6, verses 27 and 28. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. And you do it not to win an argument, but to resemble your Father. Some of us are haunted by the scoreboard. We gave generously and bills multiplied. We apologized and were met with silence. We prayed and the diagnosis stayed. Brothers and sisters, John chapter 16, verse 33. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Jesus never promised an easy path. He promised his presence on it and his victory over it. The cross is not proof that we will be spared pain. It is proof that pain will be spared the final word. Anchor this in your bones. God's smile is not the same as people's approval. If you live for the latter, your peace will be seasonal. If you live for the former, your peace will be perennial. Anchor lines for the heart. When doing right feels wrong, remember who you're standing with. When the wind is against you, check the sail, not the scoreboard. Faithfulness today is the architecture of freedom tomorrow. And this one, tattoo it on your soul. Obedience may not be rewarded immediately, but it is never wasted. Maybe you're sitting in a cramped apartment tonight, the glow of a phone in a dark room, and the question is burning. What's the point? Hear Jesus call the weary by name. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. He is not recruiting you into a program. He is inviting you into himself. The rest he gives is not the rest of inactivity. It is the rest of standing rightly aligned to the King, whose yoke is kind and whose burden is light. Some of you are carrying quiet bitterness because righteousness cost you. You tried doing right and were misunderstood. You set a boundary and were called cold. You opened your home and were taken advantage of. The temptation is to close your heart and call it wisdom. Brothers and sisters, don't let disappointment turn you into what hurt you. The shepherd who lays his life down for the sheep still walks before you, and he knows how to find you in the fog. Let me speak to the places where right currently feels wrong. To the young professional who won't pad the numbers, keep your books clean. Let God handle your name. To the parent apologizing to their child instead of pretending flawless authority, that humility is catechizing a future adult. To the spouse who chose honesty over appearance, you planted a seed. God waters seeds with time. To the student who refused to cheat, integrity is a friend you will want at your side 10 years from now. To the recovering addict who walked past the old bar while their friends laughed, angels applauded where cameras did not. To the peacemaker who stopped the gossip and now eats lunch alone, you resemble your Father today. You will not dine alone forever. And to the one who did right and was harmed anyway, this is holy ground. Jesus knows that pain personally. He healed, and they plotted. He fed, and they grumbled. He raised the dead, and they conspired to kill him and the miracle. He is not distant from your ache. He bears scars that still say your name. Brothers and sisters, your Savior knows how to turn Friday's injustice into Sunday's sunrise. There is wisdom, too, that keeps righteousness from naivete. Doing right is not the same as pleasing everyone. Doing right is not refusing boundaries. Doing right is not enabling harm. Doing right looks like the Good Samaritan. He stops, he binds, he pays, and he leaves the man in competent care. He doesn't move into the inn to prove his goodness. He loves wisely and then keeps walking in his calling. Love is costly, but not codependent. Mercy is warm, but not gullible. Holiness is not hostility. It is health. When doing right feels wrong, recalibrate your horizon. If your horizon is Friday at 5, faithfulness will seem foolish. If your horizon is the resurrection, faithfulness is the only sane thing left in a world chasing vapor. John chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. The world peace is the absence of conflict. Christ's peace is his presence within it. Brothers and sisters, some of you need to lay down the invisible contract you made with God, the deal where he gives you comfort if you give him compliance. Tear it up. He is not your client. He is your king and your father. He is better than a deal. He gives himself. And when he gives himself, he gives the strength to keep doing right in a wrong-feeling world. So what do we do tonight? We return. We repent of doing right for applause. We forgive without framing it as our superiority. We ask for help where we've only promised to try harder. We serve someone who cannot repay us. We pray for those who wounded us until our mouths teach our hearts the shape of Christ. We carry the cross that is ours. not the performance that was never asked of us. And we keep our eyes on Jesus, because faithfulness is less about clenching your jaw and more about fixing your gaze. I want to pray courage over you, the courage to make the next right decision without demand for immediate results, the courage to trust that the King keeps better books than we do, the courage to rejoice even when the soil looks barren, because you know the sour. Matthew chapter 6, verse 4. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. He sees you, midnight servant. He sees you, unseen saint. He sees you, tired truth teller. And his seeing is not passive. It is purposeful. Brothers and sisters, tonight if you need to reconcile, do it. If you need to confess, do it. If you need to forgive, do it. If you need to ask for help, do it. If you need to come to Jesus for the first time or the first time in a long time, do it. Doing right may feel wrong for a moment, but the one who defines reality says you are blessed. Come to him. Walk with him. Trust him with the parts that still hurt. The wind will not last. The kingdom will. Preach is over. If Jesus met you tonight, don't keep it. Help us spread the gospel. Like this message, subscribe, and share it with someone carrying a heavy load. Your click is a candle in someone's night. Tell us at your word in the comments and how we can pour. I have a story to tell you. Rain refused to quit that night. It came in sheets that blurred taillights and turned sidewalks into narrow rivers. Lena Pham hunched inside her coat and hurried across the street toward the little church that kept its lights on late. The sign above the door was plain. Hope House. No denomination, no schedule, just a small promise lit by 2 tired bulbs. She hadn't planned to come. She had planned to go home, microwave leftovers, and sit in the blue light of her phone until sleep ambushed her. But when she reached her bus stop, the bench was occupied by a man in a rolled-up sleeping bag, and something in her, already raw, couldn't share the shelter without sharing her heart. So she walked. And the only building glowing on that block was the one with the door propped open and the smell of coffee and old wood. Inside, a dozen people sat in folding chairs. Some sipped from paper cups. Some bowed their heads over open Bibles. Most stared at the floor like it had answers. At the front, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a tie that didn't match his shirt greeted her with a nod he must have practiced for years. "Welcome," he said softly, as if the word itself was a blanket. "I'm Pastor Micah. Find any chair you like." Lena found one near the back and kept her coat on. The room felt like a waiting room where all the clocks had been removed. She had not been to church since she left home at 19. And the smells, lemon cleaner, hymnals, coffee, excavated a childhood she both missed and mistrusted. She rubbed her thumb and forefinger together, a habit old stress had made into a tic. She was 32 now, a nurse in the surgical unit, and the last 6 months had taught her that doing right did not guarantee being right with people. She had filed the report. Everyone said the word report like it wore a suit and carried a briefcase, but for her, it was just a late-night email, typed with trembling hands, outlining what she had seen. Meds tracked out without signatures. A patient given something that wasn't ordered. A shrug that sounded like, "These things happen." She had not accused a name. She had named a pattern. And still the unit felt colder the next day. Still, the schedule shifted around her. Still, break room conversations dissolved when she entered. She had done right. It felt wrong. "Brothers and sisters," Pastor Micah said, voice steady but warm. "Some of you tonight are tired of doing right." He wasn't looking at her, but it felt like he was. He lifted his Bible and spoke like someone reading a letter from home. Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Shh. A few chairs creaked as people sat up. The word blessed sounded strange in a room full of people who looked anything but. I'm not here to sell you an easy night, he continued. I'm here to hold up Jesus in a hard one. Lena stared at the knot in the wood floor under her shoes. The pattern looked like a closed eye. After the short message, a whisper more than a sermon, people stood and prayed in small circles. Lena stayed seated, eyes on her hands, until a woman in a red raincoat sat beside her and passed a napkin that had survived a coffee spill. For your eyes, the woman said, which was kind, because Lena hadn't realized they were wet. I'm Anna. Lena, she answered, pressing napkin corners to her lashes. Hard week? A shrug. Hard pattern. Anna let the quiet sit. Sometimes it takes a few sentences to say it out loud, she offered. But you don't owe me that. Lena surprised herself by speaking. I told the truth at work. The words felt like pebbles finally released. People are different now. It's like I got off at the wrong stop and everyone else is on a different bus. Anna nodded. My brother says the right road often loses the traffic, but it keeps the sunrise. Pastor Micah moved through the room slowly, pausing to pray with anyone who looked ready. When he reached their row, he crouched to eye level. Good evening. Hi, Lena said, embarrassed by her wet face. If it helps, he said gently. The earliest church met in rooms smaller and wetter than this, with heavier hearts, and Jesus met them there. He glanced toward the front. We close with a simple prayer. Would you like to stay? She almost said no. She almost said she had to catch a bus. But the rain on the windows sounded like someone knocking, and it felt rude not to open. She nodded. Pastor Micah stood at the front again. Brothers and sisters, just one more word. Luke, chapter 5, verse 5. Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets. Some of us tonight are that tired. We'll pray for the courage to obey on empty. Heads bowed. Words rose. Lena kept her eyes open, watching lips move in patterns she used to know. When the final amen came, she slipped her coat tighter and moved toward the door. Lena, Anna said behind her, do you take the number 12 bus? Sometimes. Share my umbrella to the stop? They stepped into the rain. The umbrella held the weather off their faces, but not their shoes. The city glowed. You don't have to tell me, Anna said as they walked. But if someone made you pay for being honest, that isn't a sign to be less honest. It might be a sign to find new people. Lena laughed once, a flat sound. New people are expensive. Landlords don't take courage for rent. No, Anna said. But God takes honesty for offering and pays in a currency we can't counterfeit. At the bus stop, Anna squeezed her arm. If you come back next week, I'll save a chair. Lena almost said she wouldn't. Instead, she said, we'll see, which was the truest thing she had to give. The bus groaned to a halt. She climbed aboard, found a seat, and watched the small church shrink in the window, a lantern in a storm. At home, the apartment hummed with the faithful noises of old appliances. Lena set her keys in the dish, microwaved noodles she didn't taste, and opened the email draft she had been avoiding. Human Resources had asked for a follow-up statement. She had written half of it and stalled where the story grew teeth. Her cursor blinked like a metronome for fear. She thought of the verse the pastor read, and to her own surprise, whispered into the quiet, "At your word." She finished the email. Then she closed the laptop and pressed her palms together in a shape she hadn't used in years. God, she said. If you are listening, if you are who they say, meet me here. I'm doing right, and it feels wrong. I don't want to turn hard. I don't want to turn back. Outside, the rain softened until it was just the sound of a city washing itself. Lena slept with the light on. Morning came with a gray sky and the slow drag of a city finding its legs. Lena brewed coffee she didn't drink, tied her hair back, and checked the email again, as if words might shift overnight. They hadn't. She slid on her badge and left before her courage could negotiate with her fear. The hospital lobby smelled like sanitizer and raincoats. The elevators were crowded with the usual parade of scrubs, clogs, and conversation suspended mid-sigh. On the surgical floor, monitors blinked like small constellations. She stepped to the nurse's station and signed in. A tech glanced up and then away. Someone coughed on purpose. It wasn't theatrical. It was practiced. Her assignment list printed with a sputter. 4 post-ops, 1 fresh admit. She traced each name with a finger like a prayer and started rounds. In room 402, a woman with a bandage-wrapped abdomen asked for ice chips and a story. Lena gave her both. A cup and a quiet tale about the rain last night and a church with tired bulbs. In 405, an old man with skin like parchment gripped her wrist when she adjusted his IV. "You got good hands," he whispered. Compliments made on hospital pillows felt like benedictions. At 9:30, the call came from HR. A clarifying conversation. It was scheduled in a conference room with frosted glass that made everyone inside look like shadows in a snowstorm. The HR representative, Ms. Drummond, wore careful empathy. The unit manager, Mr. Hale, wore weariness. An investigator named Santos kept his pen poised like a metronome. "Thanks for meeting," Ms. Drummond began. "We're gathering facts." Lena nodded. "That's what I tried to do." Santos asked questions about shifts, signatures, med counts. He was methodical and not unkind. When he asked about names, Lena kept to what she had seen, not what she feared. Mr. Hale's jaw flickered. "Our unit's been through a lot," he said softly. "Morale is delicate. So are patients," Lena answered, and surprised herself with the steadiness in it. Ms. Drummond scribbled, "We appreciate candor. There may be adjustments to maintain a respectful environment while we review." Adjustments arrived by 1 p.m. A floated lunch break, a room reassignment, a chart that had been moved and returned with a sigh. None of it illegal. All of it unmistakable. During her last room check, the old man in 405, named Raymond, watched her swap a saline bag and said, "Do right long enough, and it feels like wrong, married to lonely." He chuckled once. "I outlived some choices. I recommend outliving them." "Is that your medical advice?" she asked. "It's the only medicine I can give from this bed." When her shift ended, Lena walked past the vending machines without noticing the candy, past the bulletin board with daycare ads, and into the stairwell that smelled like dust and effort. On the second landing, she stopped and pressed her forehead to the cool cinder block. The prayer that rose wasn't pretty. It was a leak. "If you're there, keep me from getting small." The rain had taken a break, as if the city had called a truce. She could have gone home. Instead, her feet remembered the route to Hope House. The door was open again. The same light. A new handful of faces. The chairs had been rearranged for a pantry line that snaked around the sanctuary. Canned beans and pasta piled like a still life of necessity. Anna waved from behind a folding table where she and a teenager sorted donated bread. "You came." "I didn't plan to." "That seems to be how we work," Anna said, smiling. "Would you mind bagging rice?" It feels like counting blessings when you're not watching the clock. Lena washed her hands at a sink that had seen better faucets and joined the assembly. The rice made soft sounds dropping into bags, like dry rain. Pastor Micah moved between conversations with the easy gait of someone who believed walking was ministry. When he reached their table, he greeted the teenager first, asked about tests and soccer tryouts, and only then turned to Lena. "Good to see you again. I didn't come for, you know?" She gestured vaguely toward the pulpit. "That's fine," he said. "The pulpit belongs to Sundays and rent checks. The rest of the week belongs to rice and umbrellas." She couldn't tell if he was being cute or honest. Maybe both. "Brothers and sisters," he called a few minutes later, standing on the low step near the front. Not a stage, more a suggestion. "Before we close the pantry, I want to give thanks." He opened his Bible, looked not at the page, but at the people. John, chapter 14, verse 27. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you." He let the words rest in the air. I don't have much else to give you today, but he does. Lena tied a knot in a rice bag and felt something in her chest unknot by degrees. After the last boxes were carried out, she lingered near the back, unsure if she wanted conversation or invisibility. Pastor Micah approached without crowding. "How's the hard pattern?" "It's consistent," she said. "HR knows my name now. Sometimes the furnace gets hotter right before the fourth man in the fire appears." He tilted his head. "If you'll allow a mixed metaphor." She smiled despite herself. "I remember that story. Sunday school flannel graph." "This isn't flannel," he said, voice lowered. "But it's still rescue. Could I pray with you? Not a speech, just a sentence or two." She nodded. He didn't take her hands, which she appreciated. He bowed slightly. "Jesus, keep Lena's heart soft and her spine strong. Give her peace not as the world gives, and give her wise friends." He opened his eyes. "Amen." "That was 3 sentences," she said, surprised by how light her tone sounded. "I'm a repeat offender." On her way out, Anna caught up. "A few of us get coffee after pantry nights. It's cheap and loud. That's the pitch." Lena hesitated. Her couch was a strong negotiator. "I can do 1 cup." The diner 2 blocks away had red vinyl booths and a jukebox that insisted on believing in 1984. They slid into a booth and ordered coffee that tasted like determination. On the wall, a TV with captions showed a storm map somewhere else. The table grew a small crowd. Anna, the teenager from the pantry whose name was Calm, a construction worker with hands like shovels, and a woman in scrubs who introduced herself as Pilar. Pilar noticed Lena's badge clipped to her bag. "Which unit?" "Surgical." "I'm ER," Pilar said. "Night shift. We're all huddles and hallway triage." "There was a thing today," Lena found herself saying. She sketched it vaguely, careful with details, reckless with feeling. Pilar listened the way ER nurses do, without flinching. "You're not crazy," Pilar said. "You're in a system that's allergic to mirrors. Thank you for holding one up." Anna tapped the table gently. "If you need someone to walk you from the bus some nights, text me. Fear shrinks when it has to share sidewalk." Lena snapped a photo of the number Anna slid over. For the first time in weeks, her laugh reached her eyes. They talked about nothing of consequence and everything at once. Cam's tryout, the cost of eggs, the way rain makes sirens sound closer. When she finally stood, she realized an hour had passed without her imagining an argument and rehearsing it alone. That night, sleep came before worry. In the morning, it met her again with news. The hospital inbox held a message titled, Follow-up, process review. The body was corporate kind, but contained a sentence that landed with the weight of a doorstop. During the review period, please report to nights. Temporary reassignment. Fewer eyes. Less noise. A test or a shelter? She couldn't tell. On her first night rotation, the hospital looked like the same building wearing another face. Hallways hummed with machines and restraint. The city outside pressed its forehead to the glass. The team was smaller. They worked like a string quartet, each player listening for the others, no conductor in sight. At 2 a.m., a patient desaturated. Lena was at the bedside fast because she had not learned how not to be. The junior resident hesitated. Lena didn't. She called for respiratory, elevated the head of bed, checked the line, and spoke to the man by name so that fear had one less place to multiply. The numbers ticked upward. The resident exhaled like he'd been underwater. "Thanks," he said, cheeks hot. "I was about slow." "You were careful," she said. "Careful matters. You'll be fast by accident after enough nights." He laughed once. "Will they teach me the part where I'm not terrified?" "Probably not," she said. "But the terrified ones tend to read the chart twice." At 4 a.m., when alarms rested and the ward felt like a library mourning something unnamed, she stepped into the break room and pulled out her phone. There was a message from an unknown number. It was simple. "Praying for your shift. John, chapter 16, verse 33. No quotes, just the reference, like a handoff. She smiled. Anna, probably, or Pastor Micah through Anna. Either way, it found her. Near dawn, as the sky turned the color of metal warming, she wheeled a portable monitor past 405. The bed was empty. The room was clean. Raymond had discharged, or slipped away. The absence felt tidy, and that made it almost worse. She paused, hand on the doorframe, and said quietly to the room, "Outlive them." On her way home, she texted Anna a photo of the sunrise from the hospital's east window. Anna sent back a rice bag emoji and a line. "He keeps better books." Lena's reply surprised her. "I'm starting to believe it." The next pantry night, she didn't decide to go until her feet were already pointed in that direction. Hope House was busy, louder, somehow brighter. Pastor Micah was at the door, greeting people with the same practiced grace. When he saw her, he didn't make a scene. He just said, "Welcome back," like a place can remember a person. He stepped to the front when the boxes were lighter. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "some of you are standing in wind that doesn't make sense. I want to say one sentence and then let us sing while we bag rice." Matthew chapter 6, verse 4. "Your Father who sees in secret will reward you." He closed the Bible and didn't explain it. He let the sentence work like yeast. Lena tied another knot. The rope inside her chest felt less like a noose and more like a tether, something that kept her from floating away. Outside, a drizzle returned. She stood under the awning with Anna and watched it turn the street slick. "You're different," Anna said gently. "I'm tired. And I'm less afraid of the tired. Then maybe you're just strong." Lena shook her head. "No, I think I'm held." They stood in the rain a while longer, not talking, the kind of silence that is proof of friendship rather than the absence of it. When they finally walked, Lena didn't check over her shoulder. Not because the street was safe, but because she was starting to believe that even if it wasn't, she wouldn't be walking alone. 2 weeks later, the wind changed without announcing itself. It started with a family who arrived at Hope House late, soaked to the knees, the mother holding a little boy whose lips were too pale. The pantry had technically closed. The rice was sealed. The lights were dim. Anna saw them first and waved them in. Come, come. Lena stepped closer out of habit more than choice. She knelt to the boy's level and introduced herself the way she did on the floor. Soft, clear, calm. What's his name? Mateo, the mother said. He's 7. He has diabetes. We lost the insulin in the move. The clinic said come back tomorrow. Mateo's breathing was fast, not loud. His skin was dry in the wrong way. Lena felt the weight of the scene arrive. The invisible clock that starts when a child's blood turns to syrup. She looked up at Pastor Micah, who was already moving toward the office phone. We'll call the free clinic, he said, hand on the receiver. And the on-call. Lena shook her head gently. We don't have that kind of time. The mother's eyes brimmed. We have no money. Lena squeezed her shoulder. We're not talking about money. She turned to Anna. Do you have a car? Anna nodded. Pastor, Lena said, already lifting Mateo. We need to go now. Hope House doors flew open like pages. The rain had returned to its oldest hymn. In the car, Anna drove with the focus of someone threading a needle in a moving train. Pastor Micah sat in the back with Mateo's mother, murmuring steady words that kept panic from growing teeth. Brothers and sisters, he said softly, as if the car itself were a sanctuary. Luke, chapter 10, verses 33 and 34. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds. He didn't force the ending. He let compassion be the engine. At the ER desk, Pilar was on triage, and the look that passed between her and Lena was worth more than a policy. Right this way. Papers appeared like stepping stones. Vitals, labs, IV. The resident from Knights recognized Lena and followed her lead without pride. Within an hour, the boy's breathing eased. Color returned from the edges inward. The mother's shoulders sank against the chair in a kind of collapse that looks like prayer even when no words are said. You did right, Pilar told Lena in the hall. It felt like panic. Maybe panic is just love on a deadline. Pastor Micah found them by the vending machines. He didn't preach. He pulled $1 from his wallet and bought 3 waters and handed them out like communion. Thank you, he said to Pilar and to Lena, his gaze steady. I keep thinking of another line. Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. Lena didn't trust her voice, so she nodded. When she finally stepped outside, dawn was prying up the city's eyelids. The rain had thinned to a mist that felt like mercy. Anna linked her arm through Lena's. Coffee? Yeah, Lena said. And the word didn't feel like an escape. It felt like thanks. News traveled its odd routes. By the next week, word of Hope House's midnight drive had reached the hospital in the way rumors do when they carry more light than heat. Some of the looks sharpened, some softened. The unit manager, Mr. Hale, stopped her near the medication room. I heard about the kid, he said, voice quieter than the hallway. Good work. It was a group decision, she answered. He nodded, studied the floor tile, then looked up. There's a safety council being assembled. Interdisciplinary. I suggested your name. He hesitated. I know you think I don't. His voice trailed. Just think about it. She said she would. In truth, she already knew. Saying yes felt less like ambition and more like stewardship. That night, alone at her kitchen table with a sink full of honest dishes, she opened a message thread she had been ignoring. Her father's last text, 3 months old. An apology written like an invoice. Measured, tidy, half true. He had not approved when she left the church of her childhood. He had not understood nursing that wasn't missionary. He had not known how to bless a daughter he couldn't control. When she filed the report at work and the fallout began, she had almost called him to say, "Are you happy?" She hadn't. A new kind of repentance rose now, quiet and unarmed. She was sorry for rehearsing speeches that would win imaginary fights. She typed, "Hi, Dad. It's Lena. Work has been complicated. I'm okay. I hope you and Mom are well." She hovered. Then, "I'm trying to do the right thing even when it costs. I think you taught me that. Thank you." She pressed send before fear could negotiate. Minutes later, 3 dots appeared, then vanished, then returned. "We love you," the reply finally said. "Call when you can." It wasn't a revival. It was a crack letting in light. The safety council met in a windowless room with a table that had been wiped by generations of meetings. A pharmacist, 2 nurses, the resident she'd helped at 2 a.m., a respiratory therapist with tattoos like small rivers, an HR rep, and Mr. Hale with a legal pad. They began with silence and ended with action. They walked the med pass like a choreography, named the blind corners, rebuilt the handoff script to make lying harder and honesty easier. It was unglamorous as repentance and just as necessary. During a break, the pharmacist, gray hair, eyes that had watched errors become policies, leaned over. "You're not popular with everyone," he said without malice. "But popularity hasn't saved a patient yet." "Neither has self-righteousness," Lena said. "I'm trying to avoid both." He smiled. "Good. We need people who can hold a mirror without aiming it like a weapon." That night at Hope House, the pantry line was longer. The church had added a health corner. Free blood pressure cuffs, a poster about insulin storage, a basket of granola bars labeled Take 2. Lena taught a 10-minute workshop on reading discharge papers without fainting. She spoke in the plain language she'd learned from the best preceptors. Short, kind sentences. No myths. No shame. She watched shoulders drop when people learned they were allowed to ask questions. Power, right-sized, was being passed hand to hand. Afterward, Pastor Micah found her in the hallway by the bulletin board, where someone had taped a kid's drawing of a blue house with a green sky. "You found a lane," he said. "I think the lane found me." "Both can be true," he said. He glanced toward the sanctuary where the chairs waited for Sunday. "There's a sentence I carry for nights like this. John, chapter 15, verse 5. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit." He put the Bible back under his arm. "You're not manufacturing. You're abiding. That's why there's peace even with the wind." Peace did not prevent pain from visiting. The investigation concluded with an outcome that frustrated everyone a little. A corrective plan, a re-education mandate, no public apologia. The nurse whose shortcuts had started Lena's email avoided her eyes in the hall, and once brushed her shoulder too hard without saying "excuse me." A note appeared on her locker one night. "Snitches sink ships." It was cut from a flyer, letters uneven. She took a photo, tossed the paper, and told Mr. Hale. He tightened his jaw and nodded. Small meannesses multiplied in the dark. He turned on a light. Lena didn't rage. She did what she had learned at Hope House, shared sidewalk. She told Anna, who sent a reply that made her laugh. 3 umbrella emojis and 1 boat. She told Pastor Micah, who texted back, "Standing with you." Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. "Blessed are the peacemakers." No. She told Pilar, who said, if they wanted to sink ships, They should have picked a nurse who doesn't float. On a quiet Sunday evening, Lena wandered into the sanctuary before service started, sat in the back, and let the music wash the week out of her. Pastor Micah stepped up with the ease of a man who knew he was not the point. "Brothers and sisters," he said, voice steady. "Some of us have been building on sand because sand is closer, cheaper, faster. I want to read a few lines. Matthew, chapter 7, verses 24 and 25. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock." Lena closed her eyes. The word founded rang like a tuning fork inside her. She thought of rice bags and insulin and break room notes and late night prayers that sounded like leaks and safety councils and fathers who texted back. She did not feel triumphant. She felt held. After benediction, as people stacked chairs and laughter replaced whispers, a voice came from Lena's left. A voice she recognized before she accepted that she did. "We need to talk," the nurse said. The one whose shortcuts had brought them all to this. Her name was Kenzie. She looked smaller without her scrubs, more like a person than a position. Lena stood. "Okay?" They stepped into the side hallway near the baptismal, where the paint had peeled in the shape of a continent. Kenzie's eyes were rimmed red, but not angry red. "I was wrong," she said, words heavy as bricks. "I was tired and scared and trying to look like I wasn't. I told myself the corners I cut were kindness. They weren't. They were laziness dressed like mercy." Lena waited. "I hated you for telling the truth." Kenzie swallowed. "I still might for a while. But I needed someone to stop me. No one did. You did." She lifted a folded paper. "I wrote a letter for the safety council. I'll say it in person too, if you want. And..." Her voice shook. "And I'm sorry." Lena felt something unclench in a place she had been protecting with jokes and workload. "Thank you," she said. It sounded insufficient and exactly right. "I'm trying to make amends," Kenzie added, almost defiant against her own shame. "It won't be pretty." "Pretty wasn't on the flyer," Lena said. "Just necessary." They stood there in the humming quiet, two women who had both bled a little for the same patients and for something larger than their job descriptions. Kenzie nodded toward the sanctuary. "I don't come here," she admitted. "But I heard your pantry gives out rice like it's holy." "It kind of is," Lena said. "You hungry?" Kenzie looked surprised, then laughed once. "Yeah, I could eat." They walked toward the fellowship hall, where Anna was already laying out bread and soup with Calm and Pilar, and a man who had started showing up after he lost his job and discovered he liked stacking chairs. Pastor Micah caught Lena's eye and didn't say a word, just lifted a hand in a small blessing that looked like permission to keep going. Outside, the sky bruised and then brightened as if the city remembered how to heal. Inside, they ate. No one announced a miracle. No one needed to. They ate bread that tasted better than it should have, and soup that tasted like someone had believed in a pot. Conversation skimmed surfaces and then dipped deeper without permission. Kenzie kept her eyes low at first, then higher, then level. When she spoke, it wasn't confession so much as inventory. "I've been caring for my mom," she said, fingers tracing the seam of a paper cup. "Working doubles. Debt I don't say out loud. I kept telling myself I was saving time so I could save her. I wasn't saving anybody." Lena broke a roll and handed half to her. "It's hard to tell the difference between hurrying and helping when you're scared." Kenzie nodded. "I'm still scared." "Me too," Lena said. "We can be scared and correct." The week sharpened its teeth in a new place. A white city vehicle idled in front of Hope House on Wednesday afternoon, and a man with a clipboard followed the engine's tone into the sanctuary. He had the look of someone accustomed to being told he was late to his own appointments. "Health Department," he announced gently, as if apologizing first might save time later. "We've received a complaint about food distribution and crowding." Pastor Micah met him with a handshake and a calm that did not come cheap. "Welcome. We want to do this right." The inspector walked the pantry like a careful parent. He pointed out what anyone could see. Dry goods too near a heater, a fridge that ought to be replaced, a need for serve-safe training for volunteers. "I'm not shutting you down," he said, "but you need a permit, and for that you need procedures. Within 30 days. Micah nodded. "We'll make the changes." After the clipboard left, a murmur moved through the room. "We can't afford a new fridge," someone whispered. "We barely afford coffee." Lena watched Micah exhale, then watched him turn that breath into a plan. He didn't preach. He made a list. He asked who could call thrift shops, who could take a free online course, who could lend a dolly on Saturday. He looked at Lena last. "If you have thoughts," he said, "we could use nurse eyes." She did. She drafted a one-page protocol that translated compliance into kindness. She borrowed a thermometer from the hospital's education office and returned it with donuts. Pilar found a nonprofit that certified volunteers for free on Tuesdays. Cam convinced his uncle to donate a gently used fridge and then convinced 3 friends to carry it up the church steps like a piano. On the other side of the week, the safety council reconvened. Kenzie brought her letter and her steadiness. Mr. Hale opened the meeting with a sentence that sounded like a new language being learned. "We're here because truth protects people." When Kenzie read, no one looked at their phones. The resident from Knights kept his eyes on the table, jaw working. The pharmacist nodded at a line about pride. The HR rep blinked more than once. When Kenzie finished, there was a silence that respected the cost, and then there were actions that spread the cost thinner. A second signature on high-risk meds, a new script for handoffs, time protected for questions that could save a life. "Unpopular," the pharmacist murmured in the hall afterward, "but excellent." "Both can be true," Lena said, remembering Micah's line and smiling at the way wisdom sometimes echoes. On a drizzly Friday, her father called. The number on her screen startled her into stillness. She stepped into the stairwell to answer. His voice was older than she remembered, and also quieter. "Your mother fell," he said. "They're keeping her for observation. Nothing broken, they think, but it scared us. The sentence frayed. "We're at St. Bartholomew's." "I'm at St. Bartholomew's," Lena said, and the coincidence didn't feel like one. They sat together in a family waiting room that could have been anywhere in America. Muted colors, a painting of a tree, a coffee machine that lied about flavor. Her father looked smaller in person than in memory. He wore his good shoes, the ones he saved for church, though it was Friday. He apologized in ways that refused drama, for pushing her, for mistaking compliance for holiness, for confusing proximity to a building with proximity to God. He didn't beg. He repented. Lena listened, then spoke without the courtroom in her head. "I'm sorry too," she said, "for judging you with jokes, for keeping score." She glanced at the doorway where a nurse she knew was wheeling a monitor past. "I don't know how to fix everything in one sitting." "I don't either," he replied, "but I can go first more often." When Pastor Micah slipped into the room an hour later, her father stood, startled. "I didn't call him," Lena said. I ran into Anna, Micah explained, a little out of breath. She told me your mom was here. I came to sit. He took a chair like a pew and didn't fill the silence with busyness. After a while, he opened his Bible and read like someone handing over water. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 16. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. He closed the book. I think some light is shining in this room. Her father stared at his hands. I've misused light, he admitted. I've used it to inspect instead of warm. Light can learn, Micah said. So can we. The scan was fine. The fall had bruised bone, not brain. Relief moved through them like weather. In the elevator afterward, Lena and her father stood with the intimacy of people relearning a hug. He cleared his throat. I heard about your report at work, he said. It made its way to our prayer chain. She braced for a lecture. It didn't come. I'm proud of you, he said simply. Doing right when it costs is the only kind I trust. The next Sunday, the health inspector returned to Hope House. The fridge gleamed like second chances. Thermometers hung on hooks. A laminated checklist waited by the door. He walked the room again and checked boxes with a pen that sounded like approval. Permit approved, he said. You're feeding people well. Pastor Micah smiled with his whole face. Thank you. Thank you, the inspector corrected, almost shy. My sister used to get food here. This matters. He had almost reached the door when Micah spoke up, not loudly. Before you go, he said, I want to read one thing over this room. People paused mid-bag, mid-laugh, mid-stir. He opened the Bible and looked out, not down. John, chapter 16, verse 33. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. He let the sentence sit. Brothers and sisters, he added, voice strong but tender. We're not avoiding the wind. We're learning to set our sails to the one who commands it. Lena felt the truth land somewhere deep and stay. She didn't feel safer. She felt steadier. The wind did not disappear, but it did change its tone. The note on her locker stopped appearing. The jokes softened. The resident from Nights asked if she would teach a session for interns on what nurses wish we knew. Kenzie volunteered for the health corner on Saturdays, clumsy at first and then competent. She stood behind the rice table one evening and told a woman to take 2 bags like she was handing out treasure. On a late shift, thin with sound, Lena paused in a doorway with her chart and watched a patient sleep, a machine purring its uneasy lullaby. She thought of the first night she'd walked into Hope House, salt on her cheeks, an iron in her jaw. She thought of the boy with the pale lips, of the fridge, of a letter read aloud, of a father's shoes, of a verse spoken in a waiting room, of light that warmed more than it inspected. She whispered into the dark room, not to be heard, but to be honest. At your word, she said again, and smiled at the way certain sentences become the shape of a life. A week later, the ward swallowed a bad night whole. A man came up from recovery too early, pain dragging sweat out of him in beads, monitors chirping like birds that didn't know it was midnight. Orders layered, hands moved, the room filled and emptied on repeat. Near dawn, the narcotic count in the Pyxis blinked wrong. 2 vials off. The charge nurse, exhausted and brittle, muttered, We'll reconcile after shift. Just sign out. Lena stared at the screen. The cursor pulsed, wanting her initials. Behind her, an aide yawned, and a resident rubbed his eyes like sand was under the lids. We can fix it at 9, the charge added, not unkindly, just desperate to stop the bleeding in a dozen places at once. Or we can fix it now, Lena said, voice even. The charge's jaw tightened. Fam! I'll own my pulls, Lena said. I won't own what I didn't do. Silence made a small clearing. Kenzie, chart in hand, entered it. She had heard enough to understand. I'll help audit, she said. If something's missing from my drawer, it's mine to explain. They stood shoulder to shoulder under fluorescent honesty and did the unglamorous work. Cross-checked orders, matched waste slips to signatures, pulled camera timestamps. 30 minutes later, the missing vials located themselves in a fractured system. One misscanned, one returned to the wrong bin by a float nurse who'd been running for 12 hours. No malice, just momentum. The charge blew out a breath. Fine, she said, more tired than angry. You were right. No, Lena said, softening it with a half smile. We were careful. At noon, after 2 hours of sleep and a shower that tricked her into thinking the day had rinsed, she walked to Hope House and found a new kind of mess. The back door had been jimmied. The pantry, half emptied by need that had learned to be quiet, looked like a moon after a meteor shower. Cans gone. Bread scattered. The old fridge, recently baptized into compliance, hummed alone. Anna stood in the doorway with a broom and a face that kept choosing gentleness. We were closed, she said, as if closing were an invitation. They took the good stuff. Pilar whistled low. Whoever it was knew what they were doing. No mess but the door. Pastor Micah turned a screw in the bent hasp slowly, like he was turning something over in his mind at the same speed. Brothers and sisters, he said finally, and the room looked up as if the words had rung a bell. He didn't climb the step. He stayed eye level. I'm mad, he admitted. I'm sad, and I'm trying to be like Jesus anyway. Luke, chapter 6, verse 30. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. He held the gaze of the room. We're going to file a report because wisdom isn't naive. And we're going to restock because love isn't scared. He delegated with the clarity of someone who trusted his people. Pilar, can you go with me to talk to the neighbor with the camera on the alley? Anna, can you call the thrift store about another deadbolt? Com, rally your weightlifters. He turned to Lena. Nurse eyes on the fridge seal. Make sure they didn't compromise temperature. They moved. The movement itself was consolation. By afternoon, a new lock held. The floor was swept. The shelves had an honest start to fullness, and the police report sat folded in Micah's pocket like obedience done for the day. They could have stopped there. At dusk, a man hovered in the doorway, young but already edged by worry, hands tucked into the pockets of a jacket that had outlived its store of warmth. He didn't enter. He apologized from the threshold, which is where shame prefers to speak. I heard you got hit, he said, not looking at anyone's eyes. I can fix doors. Micah met him halfway. I'm Micah. Luis, he said. My cousin said to come. Your cousin is wise. Micah held the door. Please. Luis came in like a stray dog, learning the alphabet of trust. He set his tool bag down and touched the broken jam with the respect of a surgeon palpating a rib. Cheap wood, he muttered, mostly to himself. Wrong screws. You want security plates and 3-inchers. They bite deeper. As he worked, conversation unwound itself. He wasn't the thief. He knew who was. Or thought he did. He didn't name him, and Micah didn't press. How much do we owe you? Micah asked when the new plate lay flush and firm, the lock catching with a solid click. Luis shrugged. Let me eat here sometimes. You don't have to earn a bowl of soup, Anna said, handing him one. He ate standing up, the way a person eats when he hasn't been invited to sit in a while. After 2 spoonfuls, he folded, cupping the bowl like a prayer. "I did time," he said to the floor. No one flinched. He nodded toward the door. "That wasn't me. But it could have been. I'm trying not to let it be." Micah's voice gentled. "I'm glad you're here." Luis's eyes flicked up. "You gonna call the cops on my friend?" "We already called," Micah said. "We told the truth. If your friend wants us to tell a different truth later, we can talk about that." "What does that mean?" Luis asked, guarded. "It means if your friend brings back what he can and looks me in the eye, I'll go with him to the station and tell the officer he chose a different way the second time." Micah's mouth tugged at a corner. "And I'll bring soup." Luis blinked. He didn't smile. Not exactly, but the muscles that make smiles thought about it. "I'll tell him," he said, and left without the hurry of the first arrival. After he was gone, Anna exhaled like she had been taught and forgot for a year. Pilar leaned against the fridge. "That's risky," she said. "So is Grace," Micah answered. "We practice both with locks and with eyes open." That night, Lena lay awake longer than she wanted to. Not with anxiety, with inventory. The ward, the audit, the door, Luis's hands. The way doing right demanded a kind of courage that didn't feel like a drumbeat, but like showing up to stack cans and ask people's names right. Her phone lit up. A message from her father. "Mom wants to know the name of your little church." The adjective made her laugh. "Hope House," she typed back. 3 dots. "We might visit," he wrote. "If that wouldn't cause trouble." "Trouble is welcome," she replied, then added, "We have a new fridge. You'll approve." On Tuesday, the Safety Council hosted its first open forum. Staff were invited to bring ideas and complaints and leave with at least one changed thing. 30 came. 10 spoke. 3 cried. The resident from Knights presented a humble slide about slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And Kenzie, voice steady, walked through a checklist like it was a kindness she had been waiting to offer. A CNA named Joy stood and said, "Sometimes no one hears us," and her name made her sentence hurt more. Mr. Hale wrote this on the whiteboard, "Hear Joy." He circled it. "We start there," he said. Later in the hall, Joy stopped Lena. "I see you," she said. It was not a compliment. It was community. Sunday arrived like a soft drum. Lena's parents slipped into a back row at Hope House and looked like tourists of grace. Cautious, curious, ready to leave if it turned out to be a trap. Micah didn't spotlight them. He preached small, about mustard seeds and sidewalks, about houses on rock and soup that tasted like belief. Midway through, he paused, as if he had heard a note and wanted to find its source. Matthew, chapter 13, verse 31, he read. "The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field." He closed the book. Small starts matter. Lena's father's shoulders went down half an inch. Her mother sang harmony on the last verse like a woman remembering a kitchen. After the benediction, they stayed. That was the miracle Lena noticed. The staying. Her father shook Micah's hand and said, "You read the Bible like it means to feed people," Micah said. "That's the only way I know." Her mother hugged Anna and asked about rice. Church felt less like a place and more like what happens when people refuse to abandon each other. That evening, a weather alert crawled along the bottom of the TV in the diner. A storm line like a spine, marching. The city braced. At the hospital, leadership sent out a call for volunteers to stay through the night in case roads closed. Lena packed a bag and texted Anna. "If the storm floods the block, keep the doors open." Anna sent back a photo of an umbrella and the verse Micah loved. John chapter 16, verse 33. No quotes, just the coordinates. The storm came like a parable. Loud, close, impartial. Sirens braided. The ER grew a line. Upstairs, windows rattled, and then remembered their training. Around midnight, the power dipped, generators roared, monitors blinked to life like soldiers told to stand again. In 402, a woman prayed out loud in Vietnamese and in tears. Lena didn't understand every word, but she understood every need. She took her hand and stayed. Down the hall, a code. People moved with fear and practice. Kenzie pressed a epi and did not rush the rhythm. The attending arrived, then listened more than he talked. The silence after was the heavy kind, and then the lighter one. Life staying. Someone said, "Thank you," and no one argued about subject or capitalization. At 3 a.m., and during a lull that only hospitals and wars know, Lena texted Micah, "Storm status?" He replied with a photo of sleeping bags in the sanctuary, lamplight and umbrellas leaning like a congregation of handles. "Dry," he wrote, a little scared. Held. Lena closed her eyes in a chair and whispered, "Not performative, not polished. So are we." By morning, the storm had spent itself and left branches like punctuation across the streets. Hope House lost one gutter and gained 3 new friends who'd slept on its floor. The pantry was a mess in the way parties are messes. Louise stood on a ladder, reattaching the downspout with calm spot anchoring like a rock. Micah stood on the step and read one sentence over the tangle of wet and glad. Matthew, chapter 7, verse 25. The rain fell, and the floods came. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. He closed the Bible and laughed like a man who had not earned joy and accepted it anyway. Let's make coffee. In the week that followed, a letter arrived on Hope House letterhead. Thin, official, with the weight that small churches fear. The landlord was selling. New owners would require a new lease at a rate that belonged to a different neighborhood. Micah read it twice, then a third time, like the words might repent. They didn't. He called a meeting. No theatrics, numbers on a whiteboard, hope on a leash. "We will not panic," he said. "We will pray. We will price. We will look for another space. And we will keep feeding people this month because hunger didn't get the letter." Lena felt the familiar ache of "doing right feels wrong" return, sharp as the first night. She looked at Anna, who looked at the rice bags, who looked at Micah, who looked at his open Bible as if it were a window. "Brothers and sisters," he said, not to manipulate, just to gather. "We'll put one foot in front of the other." Matthew chapter 6, verse 4. "Your Father who sees in secret will reward you." He sees us. That is not nothing. It was not nothing. It was the beginning of another kind of obedience. The kind that knocks on doors, learns Grant language at midnight, asks a pharmacist to host a fundraiser, and lets a nurse who is tired of being brave stand up in a room and say, "If you've ever eaten our soup, help us keep the pot on." Grant writing became their new liturgy. Hope House learned to pray with spreadsheets and to worship with itemized budgets. On a Tuesday night, they pushed 2 folding tables together and called it a war room. The whiteboard wore numbers that looked like enemies and friends, lease hikes, insurance, deposits, months of runway they did not have. Pilar showed up in her scrubs with a Tupperware of empanadas and a list of hospital foundations that sometimes funded community health partners. Cam sketched logos for a flyer between geometry problems. Luis, awkward in a collared shirt borrowed from a cousin, said he knew a landlord over on Halstead who had A place that used to be a dance studio, kind of loud floors, good bones. Anna printed grant criteria and underlined verbs like a coach. Lena sat with a legal pad and a pen that had ink enough for a small miracle. She knew budgets and insulin, not fundraising, but she knew how to translate worry into steps. "What if we borrow a page from the Safety Council?" she asked. Open forum, not just a plea for money. Invite ideas, talents, space leads, second fridges, literal hands. She looked at Micah. "We can't carry this alone." Micah nodded, grateful and tired. "Community is the only way the early church survived," he said. "No one hid their bread. We won't either." They scheduled the forum for Thursday. Word went out on bulletin boards and in text threads that usually contained storm alerts and baby photos. Joy, the CNA with the true name, taped flyers in staff lounges. Mr. Hale, surprising himself, forwarded the invitation to the hospital's community relations office. Kenzie posted it in a nurse's Facebook group and braced for comments. The health inspector, first a critic, then a friend, texted, "I'll come. I'll listen." Thursday arrived with a sky the color of aluminum and a mood that refused to be gray. Folding chairs multiplied like loaves. People came. Neighbors and patients, nurses and techs. A teacher whose classroom had been fed more than once by Hope House. 2 baristas from the corner shop who donated tip jars. A woman who said she didn't believe in God, but believed in rice. Lena's parents took seats in the back again, less cautious this time, their coats unbuttoned. Micah stood at the front and didn't reach for the step. He stayed on the floor with them. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "not for drama, but to gather scattered hearts. We need a place to put our soup and our prayers. We have 30 days. We don't have money. We do have each other. I'm going to read one line, and then we're going to listen more than we talk." He opened the Bible, then looked up. Luke, chapter 12, verse 32. "Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He shut the book with a soft thud. "We're not negotiating for the kingdom. We're looking for a lease. But we will not fear." Ideas came like rain that had learned to be gentle. The baristas offered free coffee for a Saturday fundraiser. Joy volunteered to organize a bake sale with a sign that said, "Pay what you can." The health inspector suggested a city micro-grant and pulled up the application on his phone. A retired contractor in the 3rd row said he could build shelves for cheap if someone could get lumber. Luis raised a tentative hand. "That dance studio," he said. "It won't be pretty, but I can get you a look tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Micah said, letting the word decide to be faith. After the forum, Lena found her father by the back door, tracing a finger over the peeling paint like it was scripture. "When we planted the church of my youth," he said, half smiling at the memory he used to make into a weapon, "we argued for a month about carpet color. This feels closer to Jesus." "It does," Lena said. He cleared his throat. "Your mother and I can cover first and last month if the place is right." Lena blinked. "Dad." "We can," he insisted gently. "Not as a bribe to bring you back to our lane. As a thank you for building a different one." The dance studio was 12 blocks away and 2 decades past glamour. The windows were big, the floors scarred and strong, the mirrors scuffed with the ghosts of routines. It smelled like dust and dreams. Luis's landlord friend, a woman with a buzz cut and a ring of keys that sang, named a number that made everyone wince. Then she said, "But if you fix the bathroom yourselves and you don't mind the upstairs neighbor clogging at odd hours, we can reduce for 6 months. I like rice." They walked the space like pilgrims join a new road. Lena stood in the corner where a pale rectangle marked where a poster had hung and tried to see tables, shelves, a health corner, a pulpit that wasn't. She could see it, barely, like a photo loading slow. "We can do this," she heard herself say. "Not alone," Micah added. "Never alone," Anna said, with the grin of someone who had never believed in alone. They signed. They didn't exhale. They made lists that looked like scaffolding and then climbed them. Saturdays became construction liturgies. The retired contractor taught Com how to read a tape measure. Joy painted trim with a precision that made people trust her with their veins and their door frames. Kenzie tiled a bathroom floor on her knees and called it penance, and then let someone correct her. "No, it's just repair." Luis rewired a flickering light and pretended it didn't feel like absolution. In the off hours, the hospital fundraiser grew legs. Someone suggested a scrub-top fashion show, and everyone groaned until 10 nurses and 2 residents agreed to walk a line in ridiculous prints if it would keep the soup hot. The pharmacist donated a basket called Boring But Useful, full of gift cards for groceries and bus passes. Ms. Drummond from HR sent a careful email asking if she could buy tickets. "Please," Lena wrote back, and meant it. On the night of the fundraiser, the cafeteria didn't look like itself. Lights hung low. The baristas brewed their best. The ER band, 4 staffers and a janitor who played bass like a sermon, covered old soul songs, and the janitor's solo made even the skeptics clap. Joy, at the mic for the first time in years, told a story about thinking no one heard her and then being heard by 40 people around a conference table and some god she wasn't ready to name yet. People gave money in sums that were humble and holy. 100 from a teacher, 20 from a tech, 5 singles from a patient in a gown who shuffled in and said, "You fed me." Lena didn't cry. Not then. When the total, still short but less impossible, was announced, she just felt that strange peace that had been sneaking up on her in stairwells and under umbrellas. She slipped outside to breathe and found Kenzie there, rubbing a knot out of her neck. "Sometimes doing right feels wrong, and then it doesn't," Kenzie said to the night. "Has that been your experience?" "It's been my last 3 months," Lena said. Kenzie's laugh had less iron in it now. "Me too." Move-in day felt like a parable of bodies. Boxes migrated. The new fridge hummed like a hymn. The mirrors came down, replaced by corkboards and a painted verse. Micah resisted, then granted, above the door. "Fear not, little flock." Not chapter and verse, just the sentence, like a family motto that didn't require membership cards. Lena's parents arrived with a crock pot large enough to baptize a toddler and a bag of rice that looked like it could feed a battalion. Her father looked at the scarred floor and the people and the light and said, "This is church," and did not mean the building. When the first pantry hour opened in the new space, rain made a gentle curtain outside, as if the city approved. The line curled down the block and then folded back on itself like a ribbon. Inside, they moved like a team that had learned each other's breathing. Anna handled intake with a pen that told truth kindly. Joy ran the health corner with a cuff and jokes. Kenzie explained discharge instructions to an auntie with a patience she had not always known she possessed. Luis fixed a cabinet door twice, and then admitted he liked being needed. Halfway through, Micah stood in the middle, one hand on the new fridge as if to bless it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Brothers and sisters," he said, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when wind changes. "I want to say one line over this place." He opened the Bible, glanced down, then looked up. John, chapter 15, verse 9. "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." He shut the book. We'll forget and remember. We'll lose and find, but we will abide. Lena, tying a knot on a bag that felt like more than rice, whispered the sentence that had been building her days. At your word. It didn't make her brave. It made her obedient. It was enough. That night, after the last broom leaned and the last light clicked off, she walked home under a sky finally learning blue again. Her phone buzzed. A text from the resident she'd helped months ago. Got assigned nights on purpose, it read. Wanted to learn where the peace is. She smiled, thumbed a reply. We have rice on Saturdays. At her door, she paused and looked back toward the direction of the dance studio with the mirrors turned corkboards, the old fridge, the words over the entrance, the faces that were becoming her calendar. Doing right still cost. It still sometimes felt wrong, but it had knit her to a people who stayed, and that made all the difference. The wind lifted. No trumpet. Just a breath that felt like someone nearer than the weather. She went inside, set her keys in the dish, and before anything else, said aloud into the quiet apartment what had become the shape of her life. Jesus, keep my heart soft and my spine strong. Then she turned out the light and slept like a woman held. By the second Saturday in the new place, the rhythm felt almost like a song. Bags rustled. The new fridge clicked and sighed. Joy called out numbers with the cadence of a nurse taking vitals. Sun cut a bright square on the scarred floor where a mirror used to be. Luis arrived with a man a few steps behind him, both of them carrying nothing, and that itself meaning something. The man's hoodie shadowed his eyes. His left shoe squeaked like it had learned the wrong part of walking. This is Marco, Luis said, voice careful. He wanted to. He faltered. He's here. Marco did not come all the way in. He stayed at the edge where shame and exits bargain. I took the cans, he said to the floor. Sold some. Ate some. His throat worked. I brought $40. He looked up once, fast. I can't bring back what I ate. The room tilted. Murmur, stillness, breath. Kenzie's jaw set, then loosened. Pilar crossed her arms and uncrossed them. Joy stared at the 40 like it was a small boat on a big water. Pastor Micah didn't climb the step. He stayed level, hands open at his sides like he was holding the room from the middle. Thank you for coming, he said. Sit with me a minute. Marco shook his head, then nodded, then sat on the edge of a chair like a runner who might bolt. Micah set his Bible on his knee and lifted his gaze, not his volume. I want to read one line, he said softly, and Lena felt the air prepare to receive it. Luke, chapter 15, verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. He closed the book. We're not a father. We're a pantry, but we can try to resemble that sentence. Marco stared at the floor, then at the 40, then at Micah. You gonna call the cops again? We told the truth already, Micah said. We'll keep telling it, but we also tell this. You came back. That matters. He turned to the room. Brothers and sisters, doing right requires locks and it requires open hands. We have both. They made a plan with boundaries that didn't coddle and grace that didn't lie. Marco would spend Saturdays on shelves and doors, 2 months steady. If the police followed up, Micah would go with him and say exactly what happened the second time. $40 went into the coffee can and then into rice. No one clapped. No one glared. They returned to bagging as if mercy was a task on the list, which it was. Later, Lena found Marco at the back door, driving 3-inch screws into the new plate Luis had set. He worked without flourish, measuring twice, leaning his weight right. Good bite, he muttered, and Lena heard more than hardware in it. On Monday, the hospital pressed its own hard line. A post-op spiraled, unexpected, violent, Swift. Code. Hands. Meds. The wild dance where time tripped and everyone kept rhythm anyway. They got him back for an hour and lost him in the second. The family's grief filled the hall like a weather system. Risk management opened a file. Review meetings multiplied like mirrors. Lena sat in a chair that had hosted too many apologies and none of the wrong kind. She told the sequence without drama and without defense, owning what was hers and refusing what wasn't. The resident, older by months and a decade, spoke up before anyone invited him. She caught the turn first, he said, voice low but clear. She led well. If we're reviewing, review me. I froze for 2 beats. The pharmacist traced the timeline with a pen. Pilar sat in the back, not on duty, and stayed anyway. Mr. Hale chose his words like he had learned that truth protects people. Ms. Drummond wrote less and listened more. When the report closed, the conclusion read like a sad fact. Appropriate care, sudden decline, no negligence. The paper ended. The ache did not. Lena found the chapel at shift's end. Stained glass through the simplest colors. A fake candle pretended well. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask for a trade. She said the only prayer she trusted to be more than air. Hold his family. Hold us. Keep my heart soft and my spine strong. A tech slipped in and lit the fake candle like it mattered. It did. She arrived late to Hope House, hair still damp from a scrub sink. People had already lined the walls with casseroles and quiet. Micah stood with the Bible closed and his hands open. Brothers and sisters, he said, not loud. Some of us bring sorrow tonight that does not obey schedules. I want to read one line for the ones who are mourning what cannot be fixed. He lifted his eyes. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. He didn't hurry the comfort. He let the room ache with God in it. Afterward, her father found her by the coffee urn. He did not try to fix the day. He said, I'm sorry. I am proud of you. And then held her for the length of a real hug. The week wove itself back toward ordinary with defiance. Marco returned on Saturday with a level and a lunch he shared. Luis taught him how to make a clean miter cut. He taught Luis how to laugh without apology. Kenzie posted a sign over the health corner that made Joy cackle. Ask dumb questions. We love them. Joy crossed out dumb and wrote honest. The Safety Council held open hours. A CNA brought a story and left with a new policy that protected her voice. The resident taught the intern class what a nurse means by soft signs. Mr. Hale borrowed folding chairs from Hope House for a hospital town hall. He returned them and a check from Community Relations that paid for a month of rent at the dance studio that used to be Mirrors. One quiet afternoon, Lena's mother showed up at the pantry with a bag of sewing supplies. Do you want a mending table? She asked Anna, shy and certain at once. Buttons and hems, no heavy repairs. I can do that. Anna lit like someone had flipped a switch. Yes, she said, and fetched a sign from nowhere. Mending. Pay what you want. Her father found a loose baseboard and knelt with his good shoes right in the dust. I can go first more often, he had said in the hospital. He meant it. On a windless Sunday, Micah preached small and close. He read about tiny seeds and birds finding branches. Luke, chapter 13, verse 19, he called, then quoted the promise and looked up. We are not big. We are loved. We are not rich. We are resourced. We are not safe from sorrow. We are kept. He closed the Bible like someone who trusted it to stay open inside them. After service, Lena carried out the trash with Marco. The alley smelled like rain, remembering how. He wiped his hands on his hoodie and nodded toward the door he'd fixed. I didn't think people let you back in. Sometimes they don't, she said. Sometimes they do. Feels wrong, he admitted. Half smile, half wince. Feels like grace, she said. It usually feels wrong to pride first. He laughed once, short and true. You talk like the preacher. I'm stealing lines, she said. The good ones keep me from getting small. That night, her phone chimed with a message from the resident. A photo of a protocol laminated and posted in the medroom. Waste reconciliation in real time. Sign-offs. A line at the bottom. We tell the truth when we're tired. Beneath the photo, his text. Your fingerprints, she typed back. All of ours. And put the phone face down, content to let good news be small and unannounced. She stood at her window and watched the city inhale. In the reflection, she saw herself. A woman who filed a report and made rice and learned to say, I'm sorry and thank you and at your word without bargaining. She thought of the first night at Hope House, of Anna's umbrella, of Micah's 3-sentence prayer, of a boy's pale lips turning pink, of a door fixed, of a mending table, of a father on his knees with a baseboard. The wind still pushed some days, but it pushed her toward people now, not away. She turned off the lamp and let the dark be honest. Jesus, she said into the room that had learned to listen. Keep us held, my. She slept with the window cracked, the city's low hymn moving through the screen like a promise that wasn't loud and didn't need to be. The weeks that followed learned a steadier cadence, but peace did not mean quiet. On a Tuesday morning that smelled like lemon cleaner and coffee gone brave, the hospital announced a surprise survey. State auditors with clipboards and the kind of eyes that remember everything. Word traveled ahead of them the way weather travels before a front. Charts were straightened. Posters about safety were read as if they might read back. Lena was in 405 when 2 surveyors and a hospital liaison appeared in the doorway with the soft knock of authority. We're tracing a medication process, one said. Walk us through your last narcotic pull. She did. No flourishes, no defensiveness. Just steps. Scan. Count. Waste. Witness. Document. Her hands moved with a practiced economy that made even the surveyor's pen slow down. In the medroom, the laminated protocol the resident had texted her weeks ago glinted under fluorescent lights. We tell the truth when we're tired. Do you feel safe reporting discrepancies? The other asked, pen poised. Lena did not check the doorway for witnesses. Safer now than before, she said. Because there's a process, and because when someone told the truth, leadership told it with them. Mr. Hale, standing half a step behind, let the sentence land. Later, in a hallway that smelled like coffee and apology, he stopped her. Fam, he said, name like a handshake. When you told the truth, I worried more about morale than harm. That was backward. I'm sorry. She considered making it easier for him. She didn't. Thank you, she said instead. It was all that was required and exactly what was needed. The survey ended the way inspections do when people are actually trying. Commendations and corrections. A few notes about documentation. An acknowledgement of real improvement. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like a good night of sleep after months of waking hourly. At Hope House, the same week, Pastor Micah hosted a service of lament. Not for headlines or names, just for grief that didn't know where to sit. The chairs were arranged in a loose circle. On a low table, A bowl of river stones waited next to a stack of index cards and pens. "Brothers and sisters," he said, standing without a step, palms open like he was holding the room gently. "Some of us need help letting our sorrow be seen by God and by each other." He opened his Bible and read with the tenderness of someone laying a blanket over a shivering friend. John, chapter 11, verse 35. Jesus wept. He lifted his eyes. That line says more than I can. And another, John, chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." We will not rush from the first to the second. We will carry both. People wrote on cards, then dropped stones into the bowl. A sound like rain learning to fall again. Lena wrote a name she couldn't share and a sentence she could. "Keep my heart soft." When she dropped her stone, the water rippled around the others and then stilled, as if promising to hold what it had been given. Marco came most Saturdays now, sleeves pushed up, level clipped to his pocket like new honesty. On a gray morning that wanted to become rain and then decided it wouldn't, he stood with Micah on the church step and waited for a patrol car. Luis hovered nearby with a tool bag like a security blanket. The officer who arrived looked younger than the uniform wanted him to. He listened, asked, wrote, and sighed. "Restitution and community service," he said finally. "No jail, but if you disappear..." "I won't," Marco said. "I work here now." The officer's mouth quirked. "I figured." Micah handed him a to-go cup of soup. He hesitated, then took it. "I can't accept..." "It's not a bribe," Micah said. "It's dinner." The officer shook his head and laughed once. "Okay, dinner." He left with the paperwork and the soup. Marco watched the taillights turn the corner. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He picked up a drill, and the screw bit clean. Lena's father started showing up on mending days with his sleeves rolled and a small box of tools that had belonged to his father. He didn't preach. He asked names. He measured once and cut twice when he misread the line, and then laughed at himself loud enough to give other people permission to be human. One afternoon, while her mother hemmed a skirt and taught Calm to thread a bobbin, Lena's father paused by the doorway verse, "Fear not, little flock," and traced the letters like they were carved into him. "I spent years trying to make people afraid of the wrong things," he said, half to the wall, half to her. "You have taught me better." He looked at her with an expression that had been rare and was becoming familiar. "I'm learning to be a father with my hands instead of my rules." At the hospital, the safety council voted on co-chairs. The resident nominated Lena before she could decide whether to duck. Kenzie seconded with a voice that didn't wobble. "We need steady," she said. "We need soft spines." "No, strong ones," she corrected, catching herself and smiling. The room laughed. Lena accepted, not as a victory lap, but as an assignment. The fundraiser thermometer on Hope House's corkboard inched toward a goal that had felt like a cliff face. The health inspector, whose name the congregation finally learned was Miguel, showed up with a folding table and a banner from his department. Food Safety 101. People lined up to learn how to keep leftovers from becoming emergencies. "I thought you were the enemy," Joy admitted as she wrapped a blood pressure cuff around his arm for a demo. "Turns out you're the boring kind of hero." "I'll take boring," Miguel said. Boring saves lives on Tuesdays. On a late shift thin with sound, Lena stood by a window and watched the city count its lights. The resident joined her with 2 paper cups. He handed her one. "Decaf," he said, "which is a lie we both accept." He brushed a thumb under his eye. I almost quit second month, he confessed. Felt like I was built wrong. Too slow. Too scared. You're not built wrong, she said. You're just not hardened. That's a compliment. He nodded toward the floor where a poster announced the next safety forum. I don't know if we're changing anything big, he said. We are, she said. We're making it easier to tell the truth when we're tired. That's big. Sunday turned sunny, as if the weather had been reading the bulletin. Micah preached small again, about daily bread that tastes like rice and courage that looks like showing up. Matthew chapter 6, verse 11, he read aloud, then looked up. God teaches us to pray for enough, not for control, not for applause. Enough. After service, a woman Lena had seen twice but never met pulled her aside. You're the nurse, she said. My brother says your hospital took care of him like he was somebody. She paused. It's a small thing, but small things feel big when you've had a lot of small cruelties. Thank you, Lena said, meaning it more than she could explain. It was a sentence she had learned how to receive. That evening, they opened the pantry to a line that was longer than paper and shorter than need. As they moved, bag, weigh, smile, repeat. A young man in a suit stopped at the door and checked a clipboard. I'm with the landlord, he said. Just confirming compliance before we finalize the extension. Micah met him with the calm he wore like a cardigan. Come and see, he said. They walked the space. The fridge humming like a reliable friend, the shelves labeled, the mending table, the health corner, the rice that had become a sacrament of ordinary love. The young man nodded at the verse above the door. I'm not religious, he said, but that line makes me miss my grandmother. Me too, Micah said, and I've never met your grandmother. The extension was signed on a Wednesday, the ink still smelling like future. 6 months added. Not security, but sanity. They marked the moment with sheet cake and off-key singing and a prayer Micah kept to 3 sentences like a promise he intended to keep. Jesus, thank you. Keep us generous. Keep us held. The next night, while Lena was charting in a pool of screen light, an email arrived from HR with a subject line that made her heart pause. Follow up on original report. She opened it and read slowly. The corrective plan had been completed. The unit's reporting numbers had climbed. Not because harm had risen, but because honesty had. The final line landed like a benediction she hadn't expected. Your professionalism contributed to measurable safety improvements. Thank you. She didn't forward it. She didn't post it. She screenshotted it and sent it to Anna, who replied with 3 rice bowls and, he keeps better books. Her father sent back a thumbs up and then, 2 minutes later, I am very proud of you. As if the emoji hadn't done the job. Lena closed the laptop and stood at the window with the city's chorus, rising and falling like breath. She thought of the first night in the small church with the tired bulbs, of wanting to disappear and being found, of the wind that had pushed and the steps that had held anyway. She set her palms together in the shape she trusted now and prayed the line that had become a spine and a song. At your word, she whispered. Again tomorrow. Outside, somewhere between the hospital and the dance studio with the mirrors turned into corkboards. A door clicked shut and a lock caught with the solid sound of something built deeper than cheap wood. Inside, Lena turned off the light and let the dark be honest. The city sang its low hymn. She slept like a woman not finished, but kept. Spring shouldered in without asking, and with it a notice from the city. A zoning hearing. Someone had filed a complaint about food distribution causing sidewalk congestion and noise. The paper didn't name a neighbor. It didn't have to. You could hear the voice in the commas. They gathered around the folding table that had become their war room. Micah with a pen behind his ear. Anna with a folder of signatures. Joy with a clipboard labeled ideas. Luis flipping a stress screw between his fingers. Kenzie steady as a paperweight. Lena drawing a quick flowchart for line management that looked suspiciously like kindness with arrows. "We'll show up," Micah said. "We'll bring a plan instead of just a plea." The plan rented rope stands from the hospital, borrowed trash bins from the baristas, mapped a line that curved along the wall instead of the street, scheduled sweeping times like liturgy. Miguel, the health inspector, agreed to testify to compliance. Mr. Hale surprised himself by offering a letter on hospital letterhead about community health partners. The retired contractor printed photos of shelves he'd built, corners as square as conviction. Marco volunteered for crowd team, then flushed at his own joke, then didn't back away. The hearing room the next week was all fluorescent humility and plastic chairs. A city seal hung behind a dais where 5 council members shuffled papers like they contained spells. An aide posted a timer. A man in a blazer with a map of the neighborhood pinned behind him spoke first, reminding everyone about quality of life. A woman in pearls invoked property values, as if invoking a saint. A third neighbor complained about strangers and trash, then looked at Marco in the second row and edited her nouns, too late for kindness. Micah stood when called. He didn't climb steps he didn't need. He placed both palms on the podium as if steadying something bigger than a microphone. "Good afternoon," he said, voice warm, not loud. "We run a pantry and a small health corner. We've learned as we've gone. We've made mistakes and fixed them. We brought a plan." He summarized in sentences that could wear shoes. Line ropes, trash schedule, hours. Then he lifted his gaze. "I want to read one line that shapes how we think about our street." He opened his Bible, then looked up as he always did. Luke, chapter 14, verse 13. "But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind." He closed it. "We are not a feast. We are a room with rice and soup. But we will not make people invisible to improve a view." The timer's red numbers blinked. He finished with thanks and no theatrics. Miguel testified next, the city employee speaking to city siblings. "They comply," he said. "They fixed what we asked. They trained volunteers. If every pantry ran like this, my Tuesdays would be boring." He smiled at the board, a small rebellion. "Boring saves lives." The chair nodded, made a note. A mother stepped forward holding a child by the shoulders. Lena recognized Mateo by the way his hair refused every comb. The mother's voice trembled, then found itself. "They drove us to the ER when we were out of insulin," she said. "My son is here because strangers were family." She touched Mateo's head. "You can make lines neater. Do not make hearts smaller." Joy read 3 sentences about blood pressure cuffs and dignity. Kenzie described discharge papers translated into patience. Mr. Hale's letter was entered into the minutes without fanfare, which is the best way institutions repent. Marco approached the microphone last, cap in his hands. He spoke to the wood, then to the room. "I stole from them," he said, no wobble. "They told the truth to the police. They told another truth to me." He lifted his chin. "They gave me a job fixing the door I broke in my head. I keep the line straight on Saturdays. I pick up trash. You want less trash? Help me pick up more." The Pearl woman's eyes flickered. No one clapped. The timer beeped. Then Lena stood. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I don't live on this block. I see what happens downstream when blocks don't take care of their own." She gestured to the map as if it were a patient's chart. If you close rooms like ours, emergency rooms grow lines you'll never have to stand in. If you keep rooms like ours open, neighborhoods become what everyone says they want. Safer. She hesitated. My hospital's safety council began telling the truth when we were tired. Hope House taught us that. She nodded to the dais. That's my testimony. Questions came. Hours, parking, liability, trash. They answered with specifics instead of slogans. The chair thanked them and called a recess. In the hallway, Micah leaned against a bulletin board and exhaled what felt like a year. Brothers and sisters, he said quietly, ragged and grateful. Whether we get the permit or not, we told the truth the way we wanted to live it. The board returned. Motions moved like chess pieces. The vote was 4-1 for a conditional use permit. 6 months, renewable with compliance, hours posted, line management in place, quarterly reports. Not security. Sanity. Enough. Outside, the block breathed. Joy hugged Anna and almost knocked over the trash schedule. Miguel shook Micah's hand and said, "See you on Boring Tuesday." Marco texted someone a single sentence. "We're legit." The Pearl woman passed by with her purse high. She glanced at Lena and then away. Lena did not narrate her with anger. She let the wind move through without making an idol of it. That night in the new space, they did what they'd promised. Taped hours to glass, set out rope stands, trained the crowd team. Marco took the whistle and promptly refused to use it, swept twice, and laughed at themselves in the mirrorless room. When the last bag tied, Micah stood under the verse above the door and lifted his hand as if measuring rain. "One line before we lock up," he said, eyes soft with the kind of tired that honors the day. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 16. "Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." He shut the Bible, and the room hummed like a fridge doing holy work. "We're not the light," he added. "We're just not hiding it." The hospital felt the echo. The survey's commendations became a memo, and the memo became a mandate hospital-wide. Waste reconciliation in real time. Second signatures on high-risk pulls. Soft signs. Training embedded in intern orientation. Lena sat in a meeting where a senior physician quoted the poster in the med room like a proverb. "We tell the truth when we're tired," he said. "Put it in the policy." The policy did not roll its eyes. It nodded. One evening, as Gold Hour leaned through the dance studio windows and made dust look like glitter, Lena's parents arrived carrying a folded quilt her mother had stitched across weeks of news and prayers. She spread it across the mending table. Squares cut from old clothes. A pattern that looked like a city map built from history. In the corner, she had embroidered a small line in neat letters the color of sky. "Fear not, little flock." "Put it on the wall?" her mother asked, suddenly unsure. "On the wall," Anna said, and meant it, and did it. They stepped back. The room seemed to breathe deeper. Later, Lena walked home with the quiet swagger of a day that had not been easy and still ended honest. The city moved like a choir finding a chord. A bus sighed. A child laughed the way children do when something small feels like a secret. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kenzie. A photo of a new intern class raising hands to ask questions at the safety forum, captioned, "They're not afraid to be new." Another from Marco. A shot of the rope line perfectly zigzagged, caption Escher. Engineer. She stopped on the bridge over the small river that cut through their block and watched the water, shoulder through whatever had been thrown at it. She did not make a speech to the sky. She made a promise without adjectives. "At your word," she said, not to win, but to stay. Wind pushed her hair across her cheek and then gentled. Somewhere in the distance, a door clicked shut with the sound of hinges that had been fixed with care. She walked on, spine strong, heart soft, held. A few mornings later, the line outside the dance studio was already shaped by rope stands and patience when a woman with a camera and a notebook paused at the door. She wore the professional politeness of local news. "I'm Dara," she said to Anna. "We're doing a short piece on neighborhood food access. May I observe?" Anna glanced at Micah. He considered, then nodded. "You can observe," he said, "but not intrude. No faces without permission. No shots that make suffering into scenery." Dara surprised them. "That's my rule too," she said. She watched as Joy explained blood pressure numbers like weather reports, as Kenzie translated discharge instructions into sentences a tired mind could hold, as Luis fixed a wobbling shelf without fanfare, as Marco redirected the line with a point and a grin that kept dignity intact. She took notes when Miguel stopped by to check fridge temps and stayed to carry boxes. "Could I speak with the nurse?" Dara asked later, eyes flicking toward Lena's badge. Lena wiped her hands. "Briefly," she said. "This isn't about me." "Tell me one thing," Dara said. "Why here?" Lena looked at the quilt on the wall, at the verse stitched in thread the color of sky. "Because people get well in rooms that don't measure them by what they lack." Dara's pen paused. "That's not a soundbite," she said. "It's a truth," Lena said. "You can have it anyway." 2 days later, Marco's court date arrived. The courthouse hallway smelled like paper and nerves. Micah stood with him outside courtroom 3B, hands open, eyes steady. "Last chance to run," he joked softly. Marco huffed. "I already tried that for years." Inside, the judge read the summary. Micah spoke when asked, exactly as promised. He returned. He repaired. He serves on Saturdays. He told the truth. The officer who had accepted soup nodded from the back row. The gavel didn't slam. It tapped. "Restitution credited," the judge said. "Community service logged through Hope House. Case closed unless you disappear." Marco exhaled like a tire made whole. On the sidewalk, he didn't fist pump. He texted Luis one word: "Done." That afternoon, the hospital's media team emailed Lena a request to feature a nurse championing safety for a newsletter. The draft copy arrived with her name large and the story simplified into something shiny. She walked it to Miss Drummond's office. "I'd prefer this not be about me," she said. "It was the council. It was policy. It was a lot of people telling the truth when we were tired." Ms. Drummond read the draft, then the room. "You're right," she said, picking up a pen. "Let's honor the we." The revised piece ran with photos of laminated protocols and a line from the resident about learning to listen before ordering. In the break room, someone had taped the story to the coffee machine with a post-it. "We're building this too." By Friday, Micah was thinner at the edges. He smiled like a man with a knot between his shoulders. The week had been a relay of forms and faces, the hearing and the permit and the news piece, and 2 hospital visits to parishioners whose names he wore like weight. He laughed, prayed, carried boxes, read lines. And then one afternoon, with no audience to save face for, he sat down on the sanctuary step and didn't get up right away. Lena saw him lean, the nurse in her registering pallor and breath before politeness. She crossed the room and crouched. "How long have you been dizzy?" "Since yesterday," he admitted. "Since last month," his eyes added. "Any chest pain?" "No, just a fog. Sit. Drink water. Eat an actual sandwich, not a verse." She softened it with a smile. He obeyed like a man who had finally decided not to be his own miracle. Anna fetched food. Joy fetched saltines. Luis fetched quiet. When the color returned a notch, Micah exhaled. He looked embarrassed, then repentant, then like a pastor willing to be pastored. He opened his Bible, then closed it again, and quoted without looking. Mark, chapter 6, verse 31. Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. He rubbed his brow. I have been preaching that sentence to everyone but myself. Practice it now, Lena said. Sabbath isn't a suggestion for people with less to do. They built a plan like they built everything. With a list, with people. Micah would take 2 days each week off-grid. No pantry, no calls, no just one visit. Anna would field emergencies. The team would rotate devotion readings so the room never mistook one voice for the voice. We'll tip the pulpit, Joy announced, meaning they would tilt the weight, and the phrase stuck. On Sunday, Micah stood up and told the church the truth without drama. I need rest, he said. I repent of pretending I didn't. He smiled. You'll hear other voices reading scripture. They won't be me. They'll be better because they're many. The first week of the new rhythm, Anna read aloud with her steady voice. Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. She let the room breathe. She didn't explain. She handed out rice and quiet like matched sacraments. Dara's story aired on local TV in a slot that usually hosted storms and school closings. It showed hands, not tears. Sentences, not statistics. The camera never lingered on faces without permission. It ended with Micah's voice, not his picture. We're not the light. We're just not hiding it. The comments online were mostly kind and sometimes cruel, as comments are. A man wrote, "Get a job," under a clip of the mending table. Someone else replied with a photo of a stitched hem and the words, "We have jobs. We also need thread." The station posted a link for donations and for volunteer shifts. The Tuesday sign-up sheet filled. At work, Lena's co-chair role deepened. She led a session where interns practiced saying "I don't know" out loud and discovered it did not kill them. She sat in on a debrief after a near miss and watched an attending model what it looked like to own a lapse without burning down his authority. He quoted softly, almost to himself. John, chapter 8, verse 32. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. He didn't cite it like a source. He said it like a sentence he trusted. One evening at Hope House, a man lingered by the quilt. He wore a suit that fit like a story. He introduced himself as a city council aide. We couldn't help noticing your hearing posse, he said, half amused. You brought a hospital, a health inspector, a contractor, a barista, a mother, and a guy named Marco who should be an organizer. We call that Saturday, Joy said. The aide smiled. There's talk of a small city grant for micro pantries to copy your line plan and health corner. You'd be a prototype. Interested? Interested, Micah said. He didn't promise. He didn't perform. He asked for details. They came. He took them home and put them under a Bible and a sandwich and a calendar with 2 blank days on it. On a Tuesday, when the weather couldn't decide if it was done being winter, Lena's father wandered into the sanctuary while her mother mended a jacket pocket. He stood under the verse and cleared his throat. I taught people to say "Our Father" for years, he said. I said it with rules in my mouth. He looked at Lena. Would you say it with me? Slow? They did, joining the words like 2 people carrying a stretcher. Matthew, chapter 6, verses 9 through 13. he said quietly, almost to himself. And they prayed the prayer without commentary, stopping long over "Give us this day our daily bread," as if rice were right there on the table, which it was. When they finished, he didn't cry. He looked younger by an hour. "Thank you," he said, as if she'd given him back a room in his own house. A week later, a plain envelope arrived with no return address and $40 inside. No note. Micah held it up and grinned like a boy. He didn't speculate. He folded it into the coffee can. "Provision," he said simply. On Saturday, Marco perfected his rope line zigzag and saluted the verse above the door with an exaggerated solemnity that made Calm laugh. "Engineer," he told Lena again, only half joking. "Good bite," he added, patting the jam one more time, the way a man thanks something that holds. At closing, Lena lingered by the quilt. The squares were a map of old clothes that had learned to belong together. She traced the embroidery. "Fear not, little flock," and felt the wind outside lean and then ease, like someone nearer than weather had placed a palm against the door. She locked up, turned, and walked into evening with a grace that wasn't tidy and a hope that wasn't naive. The city's hymn rose, low and honest. She didn't try to predict the next hard thing. She just prayed the sentence that had been laying rails under her days. "At your word," she said, and went where it pointed. Summer announced itself with a heat that pressed palms to backs and made the city smell like tar and memory. The pilot grant for micropantries moved from paper to sidewalks. Hope House hosted the first training. Miguel with a thermometer and a dry sense of humor. Joy with cuffs and jokes. Kenzie with discharge papers in large font. Marco walking new volunteers through rope stand choreography like a dance. Lena built health corner kits at her kitchen table. Zippered bags with glucometers, cuffs, laminated sheets about heat exhaustion. Then taught a 10-minute class on when to call and when to cool. "Brothers and sisters," Micah said at the start, palms open, voice soft enough to calm a room humming with box cutters and nerves. One line for the heat. Matthew, chapter 10, verse 29. "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father." He closed his Bible. He sees the sparrows. He sees the sidewalks. By the second week, the heat grew teeth. Rolling outages swept the neighborhood like a tired broom. Power blinked, returned, blinked again. The fridge in the dance studio hummed, faltered, hummed. Miguel arrived with a data logger and worry. "If the temp rises past safe for long," he said, "you throw food out. No heroic rice?" Lena nodded. Rules were not enemies. They were rails. But she also knew insulin lived inside purses and broke under weather like this. At the hospital, she arranged a legal loan. A medical-grade cooler. Signed chain of custody. Paperwork that made honesty easier than shortcuts. She wheeled the cooler into Hope House with the care of someone delivering a small ark. "This holds," she told Anna. "When the power blinks, this doesn't." The third afternoon of outages, a man staggered to the door, sweat bright on his temples, words slurred by heat. Pearl woman. Her name was Evelyn, they'd learned. Stood across the sidewalk with a frown that had been her weather for months. She watched as Joy sat the man down and took a pressure that worried her, as Kenzie fetched cold packs for neck and wrists, as Lena kneeled and spoke steady. "Water. Slowly. Small sips." She glanced to Miguel, who checked a temp, then nodded once. Heat exhaustion, not stroke. A call to a clinic, a ride arranged, a life unspooled from an avoidable story. Evelyn did not approach. She held her purse like a shield and then lowered it like a surrender. The next Saturday, she arrived with a box of paper fans from a garage and a note pinned to the top. For the line. She did not smile. She did not glare. She handed the box to Marco without flinching and walked away. At the hospital, the heat found the wards too. Dehydration masqueraded as confusion. Alarms told the truth and sometimes lied first. In a late meeting, the chief nursing officer made an offer. "Fam," she said, "we want you half-time at the bedside. Half-time as patient safety officer for the surgical service. You'd lead training across units." She slid a paper across the table. Title: Stipend. Authority that the policy respects. The room narrowed. Lena thought of the medroom poster. She thought of Raymond in 405, and a boy named Mateo, and rope stands and rice and a quilt stitched in sky thread. She thought of how her hands had learned the weight of a body, and her mouth had learned when to be quiet. She asked for a week. She took the question to the sanctuary when no one else was there. The fans whirred. The quilt on the wall looked like a map of roads that had chosen each other. Micah, on his new rhythm, sat 2 rows back with a sandwich and silence. He did not fill her pause with words. When she turned, he lifted his eyes. 2 lines, he said gently. First, Luke, chapter 16, verse 10. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. Second, John, chapter 15, verse 5. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. He smiled. You don't have to chase fruit, just abide. The fruit will be loud enough to find you. She took the role with a caveat. Half-time only. No desk without a shift. I need both, she told the chief. Policy and pulse. The chief nodded, relieved. We need both, she said back. On a Wednesday that felt like a stovetop, the power cut for real. The lights died, the fridge clicked quiet, the room held its breath. Anna and Marco moved like a drill they'd practiced. Doors shut, cooler opened, thermometer checked, a list of perishables triaged. Miguel appeared, relentless and precise. You trained for this, he said. You're doing it. He stayed to sweat with them. A figure appeared in the doorway. Evelyn again. Eyes on the dark. Something like decision in her jaw. Our building's generator runs the hallway AC, she said. It's loud, but it's on. If you need an extension cord to a fan. She trailed. I don't know if that's allowed. It isn't, Miguel said, already shaking his head. Evelyn flushed. I figured. But your hallway is cool? Lena asked. Yes. Would your neighbors hate us if we brought 10 chairs and sat folks in the hall for an hour? No food, just bodies not boiling. We can keep the line inside, rotate in the vulnerable. Evelyn opened her mouth, closed it, opened it. They might, she said. But they might not if I ask. She straightened. I'll ask. 30 minutes later, 10 chairs sat in a beige corridor that had only known complaints and carpet cleaning. Evelyn stood guard like a deacon, fanning an auntie and a roofer and a teen who'd gotten dizzy on the walk over. Joy rotated people like a triage waltz. Miguel hovered with a thermometer. Marco ran the rope with the quiet pride of a man who knew he was carrying his half of the ark. Anna moved with water cups. Lena moved with thanks. When the power returned, cheers rose from places that didn't know they were on the same team. Evelyn didn't linger. She folded the chairs, taped a note to the building's bulletin board. Next time we'll do this again. And walked home with the upright spine of someone who had chosen a side. The hospital's safety forum that week featured a new exercise Lena loved more than the interns did. 5 minutes of practicing, I was wrong. Attendings tried it first. Residents followed. A tech told a story about a mislabeled sample and how confession had saved a patient 3 floors away. Kenzie stood at the back, arms crossed, mouth curved, suspicious of forced vulnerability, delighted by the real kind when it showed up anyway. Brothers and sisters, Micah said that Sunday, standing with the energy of a man who had kept Sabbath and meant it. One line for the heat, the outages, the hearings, the jobs, the rope stands, the chairs and hallways. He opened the Bible and looked up. Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. He let the room hold it. Peace is not avoidance. Peace is presence. Thank you for showing up. He did not know he would need the same peace in his own house. Midweek, his phone rang at 2 a.m. His mother's neighbor had his number taped to a fridge. She fell, the woman said. She's stubborn. She says don't call. I called. Micah found his mother on the kitchen floor, pride bruised, hip intact, faith unbroken. He made tea and called Lena, not for medical heroics, but for wise questions. She came, checked pupils and pulse, coached a safe stand, confirmed nothing acute, insisted on a morning clinic. Micah expected to be the strong one. He sat at the table while his mother slept in her chair and discovered he was mostly a son. Lena handed him water and did not quote a verse. He found one anyway, quiet in his chest, a line that had been waiting since childhood. Matthew chapter 6, verse 34. He murmured when she left. Do not be anxious about tomorrow. He smiled at the ceiling. Understood. Word of his mother's fall moved through Hope House the way concern moves in healthy bodies. Quick, coordinated, useful. Anna arranged rides. Joy prepared dinners that behaved like hugs. Luis fixed a loose handrail. Evelyn sent paper fans, which made everyone laugh and then waved them gratefully while the tea cooled. Dara returned with a follow-up piece. Heat, help, and the hallway. She filmed a shot of empty chairs in Evelyn's corridor and let the narrator say, neighbors don't become allies in comments. They become allies when someone props the door. The segment ended with Miguel tapping a data logger and a line superimposed. Boring saves lives. In August, Lena put on a blazer she didn't own last year and presented at a hospital-wide summit. Slides showed audit curves bending the right way. Near misses caught because someone had permission to be slow. Medroom posters becoming policy. She closed without flourish. We tell the truth when we're tired, she said. We do it because we're not the point. Patients are. And because we have to live with ourselves when shifts end. She almost said, at your word, out loud, and didn't, choosing instead to tuck it into the quiet that followed. Afterward, a nurse from oncology approached with eyes that had seen too much and still softened. I thought I had to harden to survive, she said. I think I need to stay soft to keep anyone safe. Lena nodded. I'm trying to learn the same thing. At Hope House that evening, the line was shorter and the room was louder. Good loud. Bowls and kids and fans and the fridge humming back at the heat. Marco perfected the rope angle to avoid a trip hazard. Com declared it engineer level and saluted. Miguel checked temps, signed a form, and stayed to move boxes. Evelyn brought a stack of clip-on fans and didn't explain. Micah stood under the quilt and read one last line over a day that had refused to break and had bent instead. John, chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. He shut the Bible softly. Not as the world gives, he added, and looked at the faces that had become his liturgy. We receive it anyway. Night found Lena at her window with the city's low hymn rising slow. She did not predict the next hard thing. She did not rehearse the speech she might someday need. She put her palms together in the shape that had kept her from getting small and prayed the sentence that had made a spine in her. "At your word," she said. Tomorrow, too. Outside, somewhere between a mending table and a bedroom poster, and door clicked with that deep, honest bite that only comes from screws sunk into something stronger than cheap wood. The wind lifted and then gentled, as if someone nearer than weather approved of the work. She slept like a woman kept. September arrived pretending to be kind. Blue mornings, evenings that smelled like grilled corn and old songs. The micro-pantries multiplied. Some copied well, some copied fast. On Halstead, a new site skipped the boring parts. No thermometers, no line plan, a borrowed fridge that hummed bravado and little else. 2 neighbors ate chicken salad that had spent an afternoon in Hope instead of cold air. They got sick. An online thread did what online threads do. Blamed all pantries, all helpers, all neighbors with opinions. Dara texted Lena a link. "You shouldn't read the comments." Lena didn't. She read the incident report instead and felt the old ache. The one that said, "Doing right can look wrong when it's done sloppy." Miguel called a huddle at Hope House. "We're not the city," he said, "but we're responsible for what we teach." He laid out a recall protocol for perishables, a rapid response team to audit partner fridges, a hotline that went to Joy's phone on Tuesdays and to Kenzie's on Thursdays. Boring, spread like a bomb. Lena added a checklist printed in fonts big enough to shame laziness. Marco offered to set rope stands for any site that asked. "I'm good at lines," he said, half proud, half amused at his own sentence. They drove to Halstead with a cooler and no scolding. The organizer, a teacher with circles under her eyes, met them at the door. "I messed up," she said, before anyone could waste time. "I wanted to feed people and forgot the part where feeding people is science." "Good," Miguel said, not unkindly. "You remembered now." He pointed to the fridge, to the outlet, to the hot wall behind it. "We move this. We measure that. We say no to the kind of food that says no to heat." Lena rewrote their intake list at the table like someone drafting mercy into policy. It wasn't public relations. It was repentance with receipts. Back at the hospital, doing right put on a different mask. A surgeon with hands too famous for the break room tried to retro-sign a narcotic waste at 5:15 p.m. for a disposal at 3:40 p.m. "I was scrubbed in," he said, tired, impatient, certain. "Just sign as witness, nurse fam." "I wasn't there at 3:40, Lena said, calm as a perishable line. "I can't sign." "It's a harmless fix," he insisted, already reaching for the keyboard. "It's a false one," she said, not moving. The medroom poster glinted. "We tell the truth when we're tired." The air went thin. The resident at the Pyxis pretended to be a wall. The surgeon's jaw set. Then something in his face untensed, like a muscle at the end of its tantrum. He pulled his hands back. "Fine," he said, and the word was more than surrender. It was instruction to himself. "Find me a witness who was there." Kenzie looked up. "I was," she said. "And I remember." She keyed in, signed, left the room with Lena, their steps quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a storm no one will brag about. In the hall, the resident blew out a breath. "Thanks," he said, "for not letting the room get stupid." "Rooms learn," Lena said. "So do surgeons." At Hope House, Evelyn kept showing up like a weather pattern forgetting itself. One Saturday, she arrived with lemon bars cut into squares, so even the retired contractor nodded at the geometry, She set the pan down and did not explain. Later, she drifted to the health corner and watched Joy teach a grandmother how to wrap a cuff at home. "I don't like crowds," she announced to no one. "Me neither," Joy said, smiling. "Lucky for both of us, this is a choir." Evelyn glanced at the rope stands, the quilt, the fans clipped like small flags. "I was wrong," she said. Joy didn't make her repeat it. That afternoon, Micah's mother came to the pantry in shoes that tripped on nothing and a cardigan meant for cooler rooms. She sat at the mending table with Lena's mother and threaded a needle with the concentration of an old saint. "My son thinks he keeps this place afloat," she told Lena, eyes bright. "But I've seen who holds him." "Who?" Lena asked, knowing the answer and wanting to hear it. She tapped the quilt. "Him," she said, meaning Jesus. Then she tapped the room. "And you." Micah read a line before closing. Luke, chapter 6, verse 38. "Give, and it will be given to you. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you." He didn't preach the math. He let the room do it. A week later, Hope House hosted a cooling class that doubled as a neighborhood truce. Evelyn brought paper fans again and stood beside the table like a docent. Miguel demonstrated a water bottle plus sock DIY cold pack and declared it science you can afford. Kenzie translated symptoms into stories. If your uncle gets weird in the heat, that's his brain begging. And Joy made people laugh at their own stubbornness, then got their pressure anyway. Dara filmed without faces and aired a montage that looked like competence. The closing shot was a fan turning and a verse on a wall, and the narrator borrowed Micah's cadence for one sentence. Peace is presence. In October, the hospital's offer became a badge. Patient safety officer sat under Lena's name in small black letters. Her shift grid stayed half full of bedside blocks. The first time a nurse from another unit called at 2 a.m. We're drowning in near misses and blame. She put on shoes and showed up. She didn't bring a lecture. She brought coffee and the question she had learned to trust. Tell me what you're afraid of telling me. They did. She listened until the room exhaled, then sketched a plan on a whiteboard like a map of exits for shame. We'll start by telling the truth slower than we're used to. That will feel wrong and save lives. The Safety Council adopted a new practice. Start every meeting with someone telling a small, unglamorous, "I was wrong" story. The pharmacist told one about a decimal. The resident told one about a tone that had become a weapon. Mr. Hale told one about a meeting he rushed and a voice he missed. The room learned to clap for true things that didn't flatter anyone. Micah's mother's health thinned. Some mornings, she remembered the verse above the Hope House door. Some mornings, she remembered only the color of Lena's mother's thread. Micah sat with her often, reading aloud like a boy who had come home from school and wanted his mother to hear what he had learned. He picked short lines and soft ones. John, chapter 10, verse 27. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. She nodded, eyes closed, as if following were a muscle memory deeper than names. The night she slipped away, it was quiet. No dramatic last sentence. Just a son holding a hand and a breath that didn't come back. Micah called Lena after he called the neighbor and before he called the funeral home. She came and made tea, because sometimes tea is the only liturgy the body will accept. He didn't ask her to read. He didn't quote. He sat on the couch with his grief like a person he refused to rush. At Hope House the next evening, the chairs were set in a circle again. Micah stood with eyes that had learned a new shade of tired. Brothers and sisters, he said, voice unfrilled, I want to read only one line. He lifted the Bible and didn't look down. John, chapter 11, verse 25. I am the resurrection and the life. He shut the book. We will not pretend we are not sad. We will not pretend death is a friend. But we will stand in the doorway of that sentence together and let our hearts catch up. They did. Joy cried like someone with practice. Luis fixed nothing, and that was holy. Evelyn slipped a tissue box along the floor with a small, embarrassed kick. Marco stood by the door he'd once guarded with screws and now guarded with presents. After the amen, no one hurried to be fine. They stacked chairs slowly. Winter rehearsed in the mornings and then forgot. The city put on coats and took them off. The micro-pantry grant renewed with a clause that paid for thermometers before anything else. Miguel attended fewer emergencies. Boring settled in like a friend. One Saturday, a man Lena had never seen before hovered at the edge of the room. Clean shirt, nervous hands, eyes that kept surveying escape routes. He waited until the line thinned and approached Micah like a customer returning the wrong part. My name is Theo, he said. I work construction on Walnut. I've been sleeping in my truck. I don't need prayers. I need to know if your shower works. Micah didn't correct his theology. It does, he said. Towels in the cabinet. We use the good detergent. Theo hesitated. I don't have anything clean to change into. Lena stepped to the mending table. What size? She asked. He told her, embarrassed. She found a pair of work pants from the donation bin that needed a hem and stitched fast, hands remembering every knot her mother taught her. 15 minutes, she said. Hot water's yours in the meantime. Theo showered. He came out smaller and larger at once. He took the pants with a look that punished no one. Thank you, he said to the room, which is the only way a room like that works. Micah lifted one hand, not to bless so much as to steady. One line, he said, because one line had become the way they measured grief and joy without drowning in either. Matthew, chapter 25, verse 40. As you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. He didn't angle it like a spotlight. He set it like a table. That night, Lena stood at her window with the city turning its lights on one by one, not like an army, more like neighbors. She thought of hands. Her mother's threading a needle. Miguel's tapping a data logger. Marco's steady on a rope. Kenzie's pressing a syringe with care. Micah's empty and open. Her own, holding a pen, a cuff, a door. She didn't predict which wind would arrive next. She didn't bargain for an easier map. She set her palms together in the shape that had built a life and spoke the sentence that kept her from getting small. At your word, she said, into a room that knew how to listen, and the night answered with a quiet that felt like approval. Theo came back on Tuesday with a haircut that made his face look like it could choose again. He handed Anna a folded note. Names of 2 crews that sometimes needed day labor, and asked if he could leave his bag behind the mending table during interviews. He returned at noon with blistered hands and a grin that tried to hide itself. Tomorrow, 6 a.m., he said, like a secret that wanted to be public. Luis loaned him knee pads and advice. Drink water before you're thirsty, he said. People teach you to ignore your body. Don't. Theo nodded. I've been ignoring a lot of things. At the hospital, the Safety Council's small culture bled outward. On a Thursday that felt like it would be uneventful because nothing had broken yet, a nurse on ortho caught a near miss, a wrong side prep waiting to happen, because she had learned to say pause when her gut said so. The resident bristled. Then he remembered the poster and closed his eyes for a beat. Pause, he echoed. They traced the order, found the mismatch, fixed it, and returned to the patient with a calm that had been purchased by humility. Later, Lena sat with the team in a conference room that had lost its power to scare her. No one bragged. They wrote it up like a recipe. Ingredients, steps, where heat should be and shouldn't. Put this in the intern orientation, the attending said, pen tapping. Make pause part of our grammar. The intern in the corner nodded with an expression that looked like relief wearing a badge. Hope House became a prototype without becoming a performance. 2 new micro-pantries opened across town with thermometers hung like ornaments of sanity and rope lines that Marco set with an engineer's satisfaction. He trained a kid named Avery to angle stands just right. No bruised shins, that's dignity. And walked away like a man who trusted others to keep what he taught. Evelyn hovered at the edge of all of it, a woman relearning her neighborhood. She still didn't love crowds. She still loved order. She started showing up early to tape down cords and set a fan by the door. Air belongs here, she would announce, like a decree she had earned the right to make. Micah's grief didn't obey the calendar. On a Tuesday, he'd slept well. He could tell a joke and mean it. On a Thursday, he'd slept fine. He'd see his mother's handwriting in the grocery aisle and feel the floor move. He didn't hide it. On a Sunday, he stood with the Bible closed and his hands open. Brothers and sisters, he said, voice even but unspectacular. Some of us are fine until we are not. He lifted his eyes. One line. John, chapter 14, verse 1. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. He didn't demand his heart obey immediately. He let the sentence sit like a chair waiting for a tired body. Lena's father found him in the hallway afterward and shook his hand the way men do when words can't carry all of it. Your mother taught a stubborn man to soften, he said. Thank you for letting us watch grief without improving it. Micah smiled. Thank you for fixing a baseboard with your good shoes on. The hospital offered Lena a plaque and a platform. Photos? A speech? We'd like your story. She asked for a panel instead. A CNA, a resident, a pharmacist, Kenzie. We did this together, she told the coordinator. The day of, they sat in a row that refused hierarchy and told small, true stories. Joy's phrase from months ago, sometimes no one hears us, appeared on a slide and then on a policy, and no one pretended it was magic. It was plumbing. It made truth run. Afterward, the coordinator handed Lena an envelope. Inside, a gift card to the diner with the jukebox. She texted Anna, loaves and fishes, but pancakes. They laughed over coffee that tasted like determination and split an omelet in a booth that had become a confessional for ordinary saints. Pilar arrived at the end of a night shift, eyes rimmed and kind. We intubated fear, she said, head tipping toward the hospital across the street. Then extubated it. They let the punchline be bad because the day had been good. Theo kept showing up at 6. Work crews became names. Names became bosses who learned he returned tools and didn't lie. He brought receipts to Miguel's class on math that keeps food safe and asked the kind of questions pride hates. On a Saturday, he arrived with a tool belt of his own, not borrowed. He slung it down beside Luisha's with a reverence that looked like worship. A donor stopped by with a check that could have paid rent for 8 months. His suit fit fine. His smile fit better. He cleared his throat. We love what you're doing, he said. We'd like to help you scale. Branding, perhaps. Hope House by... He said the name of his company like a blessing he wanted returned with interest. Michael listened, grateful and cautious. Thank you, he said. We can take the check. We can't take the name. The donor blinked. It's just a small plaque. We already have a name on the wall, Micah said, nodding to the quilt in the verse. We're stubborn about it. The man hesitated, then laughed at himself, a sound that made everyone like him more. "Keep the check," he said. "Use it for fans and boring things. Boring saves lives," Miguel said from the doorway, and the donor shook his head, smiling at the conspiracy of competence. One Tuesday, Dara turned up without a camera and stood in the back, arms folded in the posture of someone not working and not sure how to stand that way. After service, she found Lena by the quilt. "I've been in rooms like this for 10 years with a camera," she said. "I'm here without one because I needed a line that wasn't for air." She paused, embarrassed. "Do you have one?" Lena didn't invent. She turned toward the sanctuary where the chairs were stacked crooked and beautiful. "Ask him," she said, nodding to Micah. Dara did. He listened without composing an ending. He opened the Bible and looked up. "Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28, he said softly. "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Then he closed the book and didn't film what happened next. A woman standing still under a sentence and letting her shoulders come down. The micro-pantry's second quarter reports arrived with graphs that weren't dramatic and therefore were precious. Fewer foodborne incidents. More blood pressures caught before they became admissions. A photo of a rope line zigzagged perfectly with a caption in someone's shaky handwriting. "We learned." At the hospital, a family left a note at the nurse's station. "Thank you for telling us the truth gently." It sat under the glass for a week and behaved like a standard. That Friday, Lena walked past the chapel and heard a voice she didn't recognize reading. She peeked in. Theo sat alone with the Bible open, lips moving. He caught her eye and looked embarrassed, then didn't. "I'm practicing," he said, "for when he asks people to read." He tapped the page. "I like the small lines." He cleared his throat. "Mark, chapter 5, verse 34. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." He shook his head, smiling at his own audacity. "I know I'm not a daughter, but I want the second half." "You can borrow it," Lena said. "Peace doesn't check pronouns." The city sent another notice, routine this time, compliance review. Miguel yawned. "Bring the boring." They did. Thermometers, logs, lists, a new procedure Joy had written titled "How to Say No Kindly to Mayonnaise." The inspector signed with the practiced flourish of a man who liked his job better when it didn't surprise him. "Renewed," he said. "Again." Evelyn brought a card to the mending table with a handwriting that had learned gentleness. "For the officers who didn't arrest Marco," she said, cheeks pink. "I wrote, 'Thank you for choosing mercy with rules.'" She glanced at Lena, uncertain. "Do you think that sounds silly?" "It sounds like this block," Lena said. Winter knocked for real this time and did not wait for the invitation. Coats multiplied. Breath wrote lines only cold air knows. The dance studio's heater coughed and then remembered its job. The quilt kept its color. One evening, after the pantry closed and the fans were still, Micah stood in the middle of the room and traced a square of light on the floor where a mirror used to be. He called to those within earshot without raising his voice. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "we will end the night with one line for the ones who are starting over and the ones who don't know how." He opened the Bible and lifted his eyes. John, chapter 3, verse 17. "For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." He shut it gently. No condemnation. Real rescue. Lena locked the door with that line still in her body and walked into a cold that made stars look close. She thought of the season behind her, of audits and lines, of rope stands and decaf coffee, of a surgeon learning to sign the right name, and a neighbor learning to set out chairs, and a son learning to grieve without pretending it was noble. She reached for the sentence she had been living by, not as a spell, not as a lever, but as a way to keep from getting small. "At your word," she said to the night. The wind answered with a hush that sounded like someone's hand, warm and near, laid against the door. She went home, spine strong, heart soft, held. Snow came like a careful scribe, laying thin lines across curbs and handrails, making the city look briefly honest. The cold that followed was less poetic. It bit. Pipes complained. Breath turned to brief ghosts. The city opened warming centers. They filled in an hour. Micah put a handwritten sign in Hope House's window again. Warmth, tea, chairs. He didn't advertise beds because they didn't have them. He advertised presents because they did. Evelyn arrived first, coat zipped to her chin, a box of those paper fans tucked under her arm out of habit before she remembered the weather and laughed at herself. She set out thermoses instead and marched a space heater to the far wall, eyeing outlets like a general studies terrain. Miguel followed with a carbon monoxide monitor and the face of a man who had lost sleep to headlines. "Windows cracked 2 fingers," he said, tapping the device. "We heat bodies, not tragedies." Theo came with planks to brace the door against drift. Luis carried in a canvas bag of tools and a loaf of bread he'd learned to make on nights he wanted his apartment to smell like mercy. Joy packed a bin labeled "mittens that don't match" and declared it holy anyway. By dusk, the room moved to the rhythm of mugs and a chorus of small thawing noises. A teenager with a skateboard under his arm dozed in a chair near the quilt. An older man with a veteran's posture stared at the verse on the wall as if memorizing it could add insulation. A woman Lena hadn't met before hovered by the mending table with a coat missing buttons and a name missing from introductions. Lena slipped into the room after her shift, cheeks stung pink by the walk, scrubs hidden under a coat that had learned to keep up. She poured tea, offered a bowl, and knelt to thread a needle for the woman with the coat. "What do you want me to sew on?" she asked. The woman pointed to her own chest with 2 fingers, as if embarrassed to specify. "Buttons," she said, "so I can get hired and pretend I've always had it together." "Pretend isn't required," Lena said, smiling. "But buttons help." At the hospital, the storm meant thin staff and thick hallways. The ER's automatic doors hiccuped with every gust. A power blink was contained by generators that had practiced this waltz for decades. Lena rounded like someone balancing more than a vitals list, texting Hope House between rooms, swapping a hat off her head for one on a patient's wife who had left home to follow an ambulance and lost feeling in her ears. In the med room, a new intern looked at the narcotic log like it might bite him. "I'm going to do this wrong," he said, honest as a shock. "You're going to do it slow," Lena said. "That's the opposite of wrong." She stood until his shoulders dropped and his initials landed where they should. Outside, a resident leaned against the wall and breathed steam into his hands. "I used to hate this weather," he said to no one, to everyone. "Now I hate it and think it's kind of brave." Back at the pantry, the air was a collage of warm things. Cinnamon, wool, cheap tea. The faint soap smell of Theo's shower running in the back for a kid whose bones couldn't remember July. Micah moved through the room with a pace that refused to hurry the vulnerable. He carried his grief in a way that didn't drop it on anyone and didn't deny it either. When the room settled, he stood under the quilt and kept his Bible closed. "Brothers and sisters," he said softly. "A single line for a night when the city pretends to be one house." He lifted his eyes. Luke, chapter 15, verse 4. What man of you, having 100 sheep, if he has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? He let it rest on tile and wool and tired. If you're here because the cold hurted you, you're the one we were waiting to find. Marco took the late outer watch, shovel propped by the door like a leaning promise. He saw the shape move first. A small figure slipping between cars. No hat, no plan. A panic shaped like a child. Marco tapped the glass. Joy saw it too. By the time Micah reached the door, the kid had darted across the street, up the stairs of the building Evelyn called home, then disappeared. Third floor stairwell, Evelyn said, already moving, keys in hand, rules in one palm, determination in the other. There's a corner that catches wind and kids. They found him wedged behind the radiator with a face that didn't yet know which adults were safe. Evelyn squatted until her knees complained and then ignored them. Hey, she said, voice that had scolded pantries learning to talk like lullabies. I'm Evelyn. You're freezing. We have tea. The boy looked at Lena, at her hands, at the scarf she had unwound. It's not stupid to be cold, Lena said. It's just cold to be cold. She held out the scarf like a flag of truce. He let her wrap it. Joy handed him a mittens that don't match pair. He didn't flinch. He shivered once, hard enough to rattle dignity, then breathed. They walked him back under a sky that tried to be still and failed. In the room, the teenager with the skateboard looked up and met the boy's eyes with the ease of a captain spotting a new recruit. Sit, he said, sliding his own hat across. The tea's bad, but it's hot. Micah didn't turn the moment into a sermon. He ruffled the boy's hair gently and went back to the stove to stir the soup, as if heat were a parable that needed patience. The next day, a pipe burst in a building 2 streets over. Water made a new river where no one had asked for one. Evelyn stood at the door like a lighthouse and pointed people toward towels and chairs, and Miguel, who had shown up with a shop vac because his boredom always wore a cape. Theo and Luis hauled boxes up 2 flights like men who remembered when their lungs did less. Marco ran lines outside to keep bodies moving. Rope stands a geometry of mercy, even in ice. By late afternoon, the storm drummed itself out like a tired drummer. The room exhaled and turned to the work that always came after. The sweeping, the tallying, the quiet counting of what had been lost and what had not. Lena slipped out early enough to make her evening shift, the hospital's lights a constellation she never got tired of. In the chapel, a candle flickered for Micah's mother, for a boy with heat-burned fingers, for the kind of winter's grief makes. She didn't add a new flame. She sat and borrowed the ones there. A week later, a letter arrived bearing a logo she didn't recognize until she thought of boardrooms and lanyards. A national patient safety conference wanted her to keynote. The word felt wrong in her mouth. Keynote, like a shoe that pinched. She wanted to say no. She wanted to stay small on purpose. She showed the letter to Micah at a folding table speckled with flour from a bread lesson that had gotten out of hand. Half the talk will be boring, she warned him. Checklists, waste logs, rope lines in hospitals. Boring saves lives, Miguel said from the sink without turning around. Micah grinned, then sobered. If you go, he said, take them your true story. Don't make yourself the hero. Make honesty the hero. At the conference, the room was all warm carpeting and tepid coffee. People wore name tags and competence. Lena stood behind a lectern and told small, stubborn stories. The first pause. The poster that became policy. The wrong side prep that wasn't. The way telling the truth when tired had become culture. She mentioned a pantry without naming it. a quilt without explaining why it braced her spine, a verse without quoting it. She didn't say "at your word" out loud. She built her sentences around its grain. During the Q&A, a hand rose, an administrator with metrics in his binder. "How do you get people to comply?" he asked, "when compliance is unpopular?" "You change what popular means," she said. "You make honesty normal and shortcuts weird. You clap for confessions and make cover-ups boring." She paused. "And you put people in the room who the policy forgot to invite." A CNA found her afterward with tears, who didn't apologize for existence. "I didn't think anyone would say it like that in a room like this," the CNA said. "We clap now. For real." When she returned, Hope House was in the familiar mode of ordinary rescue. The rope line zigzagged. The quilt held. Evelyn had found a way to clip holiday lights around the verse without angering Miguel's sense of electrical law. Joy ran a flu shot and jokes corner. Kenzie translated discharge papers into kindness. Theo installed a new handrail without being asked. Luis baked bread that embarrassed store bread. Marco saluted his rope stands and refused to blow the whistle because everyone had learned the dance. Micah stood under the lights with the Bible open and eyes up. "Brothers and sisters," he said. "One line for rooms that learned how to be brave without being loud." He took a breath. John, chapter 15, verse 9. "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." He closed it. Let the sentence sit. Let the steam from the soup underline it. Later, Lena stood at the door with her coat half on and watched the block do its slow evening trick. Lights rising, windows writing warm rectangles on snow that had decided to stay polite. She thought of the boy in the stairwell, of a burst pipe, of the med room where a signature had waited for a liar and gotten a witness instead, of a conference room clapping for boring, of a quilt with a verse stitched like a vow. She didn't make a speech to the night. She made the promise that had carried her through heat and hearings, grief and grants, rope stands and rooms where truth learned to breathe. "At your word," she said, soft as steam, strong as screws sunk into something better than cheap wood, and stepped into the cold with a heart that refused to harden and a spine that knew why it stood. The cold hung on longer than the calendar allowed, and the block learned to keep its coat on, even when the sun pretended otherwise. On a brittle Thursday night, an alarm tore down Walnut like a rip in fabric. High, panicked, metallic. Fire trucks shouldered the snowbanks. Someone pounded on Hope House's door. Evelyn reached it first. "Gas leak," the neighbor shouted, breath a cloud. "Third floor. They're clearing the building." Micah's eyes found Anna's. They didn't need to speak. Chairs moved, thermoses refilled. Joy set out the bin of mittens that don't match like a sacrament. Miguel appeared as if summoned by rules. "Windows open," he said. "Heaters off. Fans on away from the door." Luis checked the hinges he had learned by heart. Theo hauled out the partition he and Marco had built from plywood and dignity, creating a draft buffer to keep the room warm enough to be welcome. People poured in with the smell of cold metal on their coats. A mother with a toddler asleep on her collarbone. A man in socks who had not intended to be seen by anyone. A cat in a carrier announcing her displeasure without restraint. Lena arrived midstream, hair damp from a scrub sink, badge clipped to a sweater that had defied bleach. She moved like a small team, checking pulses, passing tea, spotting a hand that shook too hard, and finding the right glucose tabs without making a speech about anything. In the corner by the quilt, an older woman stared at the stitched line. "Fear not, little flock," and whispered it as if it might learn her mouth. "I don't believe in God," she told Joy, unprompted, embarrassed. "I just liked the sentence." "Me too," Joy said, and took her blood pressure anyway. A man in a coat 2 sizes too thin stood with his fists stuffed in his pockets as if to keep his past from falling out. He kept glancing to the door like a runner who hadn't decided whether to bolt. Marco drifted near without blocking the exit. "You want a job for 10 minutes?" he asked, nodding at the rope stands. "People walk straighter when there's a path." The man blinked, as if no one had offered competence first. He nodded. 10 minutes became an hour. At some point, his hands left his pockets. Outside, firefighters moved like a script rewritten under pressure. Hose lines hissed. A ladder traced the night. The cold that gnawed at faces made their breath look brave. Micah hovered by the door long enough to thank a captain by name, and not so long that the room wondered where he was. He kept his Bible closed. When the surge settled into a murmur, he stepped onto the floor, not the step, and lifted his eyes. "Brothers and sisters," he said into a room that had become an ark again. "A single line for nights when we go where the wind herds us." He drew a breath that put weight in the words. Mark, chapter 4, verse 39. "Peace, be still." He smiled, small and true. He said it to weather. We can say it to our hearts. Later, after the gas was capped and the fire department declared the building safe to wait for morning, the room softened into a camp-out tone. Whispers, the crackle of donated snacks, the cat finally conceding that sleep might be allowed. Evelyn took the unofficial head count and then an official one, wrote names and apartment numbers in her neat, uncompromising hand, and texted a building-wide update. "She's a commander," Joy murmured to Lena, impressed. "We're gonna put her in charge of the fans forever." Lena grinned, then saw Micah through the crowd. Steady, smiling, the kind of tired that you don't show unless you trust your people. He looked at her and tipped his head toward the back. She followed. In the small kitchenette that had learned to pretend to be more, he leaned against the counter. "You okay?" he asked. "Mostly," she said. "You?" "Mostly," he echoed. He rubbed the heel of his hand under one eye. "Grief sneaks," he admitted, voice low. "Music in the grocery store. A handwriting on an old envelope. A verse I read to others and realize I'm reading to myself." She didn't try to fix it. "She'd like this night," she said, meaning his mother. "The way people fit in here." He laughed, not to deflect, but because it was true. She'd moved the chairs faster than anyone. By dawn, breath rose in small clouds as neighbors trudged back toward their building, keys like talismans in their fists. The cat complained one last goodbye and forgave nobody. The man who had run the rope, Stan, shook Marco's hand and said, "I'm Ron." Like a door that had stuck in the jam and now swung without squeal. Marco pressed a card into it. "Saturdays," he said. "If you want to keep people walking straighter." Evelyn left last, a stack of paper fans under her arm out of habit. She paused beneath the quilt and traced the stitched letters with a gloved finger. "You were right," she told Micah without facing him. "Peace isn't quiet, it's people." "At least on this block," he said. The hospital woke to its own aftershocks. The leak had shuttered a pharmacy for an hour. A near miss walked into Lena's inbox like a volunteer begging to be trained. In the noon huddle, she presented a quick fix and a slower change. Rerouted deliveries, a script for cross-checking and outages. She watched a surgeon who had bristled in September nod without theatrics and say, "Let's build it," as if the words were a muscle he had learned. On a Wednesday between storms, the Safety Council hosted a story hour. Not triumphs, just near misses that didn't become headlines because someone was allowed to pause. Kenzie went first. "I was petty at a Pixis at 3 a.m., she said, surprising everyone with the word. And then I remembered the poster. I told the truth when I was tired. She smiled without apology. I slept harder after. At Hope House, they added a new corner. Sign up for work days, with a corkboard for job leads and a list of people willing to vouch for those who had learned to show up on Saturdays. Theo put his name on both sides. Luis added his with a note. I'll teach drills if you bring your own bit. Evelyn wrote, references given only if you return my fans. She drew a winking face and then looked away, embarrassed at her own levity. The boy from the stairwell began appearing after school with a skateboard and a hunger he didn't mock. He learned to stack chairs quietly. He learned where the spoons went. He learned that Anna would ask about homework and that saying I did it would lead to show me. On a Sunday evening, he sat next to Micah during the last song and didn't sing and didn't leave. Micah read a single sentence over him as if blessing were something that could be laid down like a coat. Luke, chapter 18, verse 16. Let the children come to me, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Spring leaned in at last, warmer than polite. The snow receded into alleys like a secret. The quilt kept its color. The rope stands got put away and then pulled out again because habits that taught dignity deserved repetition. The medroom poster needed replacing from use. The new one came not as flimsy paper, but as a small plaque. Same words, more steadfast. We tell the truth when we're tired. Lena's father visited on a Saturday with a box of screws and a softer voice. He stood under the verse with Micah and said, I used to preach to people who agreed with me. This feels like learning to preach to God instead. Micah smiled. That's the only audience that isn't fickle. When the pantry closed that night, the room kept the glow that work leaves behind when it has been prayer all along. Anna turned off lights. Luis checked the door. Joy packed the cuffs. Kenzie folded the quilt's edges like she was tucking in a child. Marco tapped the rope stand's base the way a man thanks something that holds. Evelyn took one last slow look and nodded, as if approving the weather. Lena pulled on her coat and stood at the threshold longer than the cold required, eyes on the street that had taught her so much about small courage. She thought of the first night and the blue light of her phone, of an email that shook a unit awake, of rice knocked into bags and a little boy's lips learning pink again, of hallways made into cooling centers, of donors who learned to be quiet and neighbors who learned to speak, of grief that did not demand spectacle, of a line that held them all. She didn't predict. She didn't bargain. She set her palms together in the shape that had built rails under every day and let the sentence that had become a road carry her again. At your word, she said, and stepped into a season that would ask for it again and again, with a heart that refused to harden and a spine that knew why it stood, held by a love that kept finding ways to be visible. Spring kept its promise and then asked for more. The hospital's legal team scheduled a meeting with too many chairs and too much coffee. A reporter had filed a public records request about adverse events. Routine, impersonal, ruthless only to sloppiness. The chief invited Lena because culture had become her lane. We'll release the statement, legal said, tapping a draft. Appropriate care provided. Systems continuously improving. No admissions of error. The surgeon who had bristled in September leaned back, reading the ceiling. Reads like nobody was here, he muttered. Lena flipped the paper once, then set it down like it might be fragile. Can we say what actually changed? She asked. Not the bloodless line, the boring, costly parts. Legal raised an eyebrow. Like what? Waste reconciliation in real time, she said. Second signatures. The pause. The fact that a wrong side prep didn't happen because a new nurse was allowed to stop a room. The chief looked from Lena to legal, then back. If we name specifics, we admit they were missing, legal warned. Or we prove we know where to look, Lena said. She tried not to sound like a pulpit and failed a little. Matthew chapter 5, verse 37. Let what you say be simply yes or no. A plain yes builds trust. She swallowed. So does a plain no. Silence examined the carpet. The surgeon rubbed his jaw. Put in the specifics, he said finally. If we're proud of the changes, we can survive the admission that we needed them. The statement went out with sentences that could wear shoes. The inbox did not explode. A family sent a handwritten note. Thank you for telling the truth the way you took care of us. Gently. The world did not end. A culture took one more breath. Theo's name appeared on a lease 3 blocks from the dance studio, with the mirrors turned into corkboards. The apartment was small enough to be honest and high enough to hold a sliver of sky. He invited Hope House to bless it with what they had. They came with what they always had. Rice, fans, a lamp that worked, screws that bit, a quilted pot holder someone had made wrong and loved anyway. They stood in a circle that bumped into walls and laughed about it. Micah didn't preach. He opened the Bible and looked up. John, chapter 14, verse 23. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. He closed it. May this room be more home than storage. Theo nodded, embarrassed and unembarrassed. He had scrubbed the sink twice before they arrived and left the streaks on purpose so no one thought he'd hired help. After the amen, he pulled Lena aside and tapped his chest with 2 fingers. That line, he said, voice low. About home. I want that. So do I, she answered before she could edit herself. The confession surprised them both with how old it felt, like something she'd been carrying since the first night she stood under tired bulbs. On Sunday, Lena took a seat halfway back and let her body remember the room's cadence without asking her permission. Micah stood on the floor with his hands open, eyes soft with a grief that had learned to share space with joy. Brothers and sisters, he said, voice warm and steady. For the ones standing at a doorway and wondering if it's theirs. One line. He lifted the Bible and didn't need it. Luke, chapter 15, verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. And ran, and embraced him, and kissed him. He didn't extend an aisle invitation. He extended room. After the last song, people stacked chairs with the competence of a choir. Lena stayed seated. The verse hovered like breath on a cold day. You could almost see it. Micah sat beside her without asking her to move first. You look like a person deciding something, he said. I am, she answered, eyes on the scuffed floor, which had become a map of next steps. I keep saying at your word to a God I've been treating like a consultant. She laughed once, quick. I don't want a consultant. What do you want? She exhaled. A king, a father, a shepherd who knows how to find me when the wind gets loud. He didn't clap. He didn't narrate. He nodded like a man listening to good news for him. There's a tub, he said, glancing toward the back room where a portable baptistry leaned like a quiet future. And there's a river 2 bus stops away. We don't rush water. We don't delay it to make a show. We go when the sentence becomes your feet. She swallowed. I think it already has. They set it for the next Sunday because her father would be in town and because a quiet week felt like a poor excuse to postpone obedience. She told Anna at the mending table, half whisper, half laugh, and Anna's eyes did the thing eyes do when they recognize a sunrise and don't want to scare it. "I'll bring towels," Anna said. "The good ones." That week did not respect her calendar. On Tuesday, a patient she loved took a turn that none of the protocols could catch, the chart filled with words that tried and failed to add up to mercy. In the chapel, Lena sat with palms open and no adjectives. "Hold them," she prayed. "Hold me." The candle flickered because air moves even when you tell the world to be still. On Wednesday, Evelyn showed up with a folded piece of paper and shyness that didn't fit her coat. "I wrote something for the board," she said. "Not the city board. Ours." She unfolded a letter that apologized for the hearing she'd started and asked for the volunteer job no one had ever named. Line captain. Joy stamped it approved with a pink ink pad she'd bought for jokes and then kept for authority. On Thursday, legal sent another draft, this time for the micro-pantry grant renewal. It asked for metrics and delivered them. It asked for stories and tried to sand them down. Anna slid the paper to Lena. "Translate this into our language?" she asked. Lena wrote truth in short sentences. "We measured temp hourly and threw food out twice because love obeys thermometers. We caught 12 blood pressures that needed doctors. A neighbor who once filed a complaint now tapes fans to the wall. We don't name miracles. We count them anyway." On Friday evening, Lena and her father stood in the sanctuary alone, the lights slanting through the high windows as if the city had tipped its hand. He traced the verse above the door with his eyes, and then faced her fully, the way fathers face daughters when apologies need to be given weight and not ceremony. "I made faith into a fence," he said simply. "I'm sorry." She stepped into his arms because some sentences deserve to be met with skin and not syllables. "Thank you," she said into the fabric of his coat. After a quiet that felt like repair, he pulled back and grinned. "I have never in my life wanted to see a portable tub more." The river chose Sunday morning to be especially itself. Brown, cold, honest. They took the bus anyway. A small crowd came with towels in a loud bag, with a thermos of tea. With that look the early church must have worn when they remembered the world could be astonished by ordinary water. They didn't bring signs. They brought presents. Micah stepped into the shallow, winced like a man admitting he had toes, and turned to face the bank. "Brothers and sisters," he called over the hush that rivers give if you're polite to them. "One line for water and new roads." He lifted his voice just enough. John, chapter 3, verse 16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." Lena stepped down and in, breath catching at the cold shock that felt like waking and mercy at once. Micah didn't make speeches. He asked the question that mattered. "Do you trust Jesus, his word, his work, his way, and want to follow him?" "I do," she said. And the sentence surprised her with how old it sounded, like it had been waiting since a night with rice and tired bulbs. "At his word," Micah murmured, and lowered her under. The river closed and opened around her like a door learning the right hinge. When she rose, she laughed. Ugly, holy, unpracticed. Anna wrapped her in the good towels. Her father cried the way stubborn men do when truth refuses to be managed. They walked back to the bus stop, dripping and warm. The city looked like it always had, and like it might be rehearsing resurrection in small corners. People stared a little. Joy waved at them like it was the most normal thing to be damp on a Sunday. That afternoon, She sat at her kitchen table with tea that no longer tasted like determination. It tasted like thanks. The inbox pinged with the grant renewal approval, with a note from legal that said, "Your edits helped," with a text from Theo of a shelf he'd hung perfectly level. She didn't arrange them into a moral. She didn't number them as proof. She set her palms together in the shape that had long since become a life, and let the sentence that had carried her through wind and rooms and rope stands carry her again. "At your word," she said quietly, not negotiating, not performing, and the air answered with the smallest sense of someone nearer than weather, making a home. The week after the river, ordinary days grew a new color. Lena kept forgetting, and then remembering that everything was, in a way, wet and bright. She still charted, still tied gowns, still taught interns to say pause. But something in her moved like a person whose address had changed. At Hope House, towels dried on a line strung near the back sink, a halo of cotton that made the room smell like clean beginnings. Theo taped a small card inside his front door. "At your word," written in block letters that tried not to shake. Evelyn arranged the fans in a pattern she called efficient, then stepped back and admitted it also looked like flowers. The hospital statement with specifics traveled through inboxes and out into conversations, like a weather report people actually used. A family from 402 sent cookies with a note. "Thanks for saying the unflattering parts out loud." In a unit meeting, the surgeon who had once pushed for a retro sign stared at the medroom plaque and said to no one in particular, "We all like to think we're exceptions. We're not." He turned to Lena. "Thanks for insisting I remember." That Saturday, Mateo's mother arrived at the pantry with invitations drawn in marker. A 7.5 birthday celebration at the park, because 7 had been the kind of year that demanded a do-over. The card corners were soft. "You saved us," she told Micah in the doorway, then corrected herself without losing the warmth. "Jesus saved us. You drove the car." "We were all in the car," Micah said, waving the paper like a flag. On the day of the party, the park wore sunlight like it wanted a job. Balloons learned to stay tethered. Mateo ran until running turned into flight. Joy blew bubbles that made reluctant adults grin like children. Miguel arrived in a t-shirt that said, "Boring saves lives and refused to be embarrassed." Kenzie showed up with a piñata that refused to crack until Marco whispered something to it, and then it yielded, as if dignity had a breaking point too. Evelyn brought lemon bars cut into equal squares. She placed them on the table like peace offerings, and then, to her own surprise, stayed. Lena stood by the swings with a paper plate and a kind of gratitude that made sitting seem the only honest posture. Micah wandered over, hands in his pockets, the wind finding his coat. "One line for parties we almost didn't get," he said, half smiling, not sermonizing. Luke, chapter 15, verse 23. "Let us eat and celebrate." She laughed. "That's my favorite verse today." "It's an easy one to keep," he said. As the sun slanted, Mateo climbed onto a picnic table like a small king and announced, "I am alive." So simply the sentence made 3 adults swallow hard. His mother covered her face for a moment, then dropped her hands and clapped first. That night, Lena walked home under a sky the color of forgiveness and thought about the odd arithmetic of the last months. Units and rope lines, hearings and quilts. The way a tub in a river could change the way a person walked down a familiar street. She reached her apartment, set her keys in the dish, and found a note from her father on the table where she hadn't expected mail. "We're learning. I love you. P.S. I borrowed your drill and returned it. Good bite." She laughed out loud, a sound that surprised her neighbors into smiling through their own doors. Work stayed work. The next week brought a patient whose fear turned every IV start into a story from childhood. A mislabel almost caught by arrogance, but ultimately caught by humility. A new intern who repeated, "I don't know," like a confession, and then discovered it was a door. In the safety forum, Joy opened with a 5-minute exercise where each person named a rule they used to resent and now respected. The surgeon said, "second signatures." The pharmacist said, "decimal points." The resident said, "nurses." The room clapped, not because clapping was required, but because gratitude had become a habit easier than cynicism. Dara visited with her camera resting at her hip, not raised. "One more piece," she asked Micah. "Not for ratings, for a series on rooms that change their blocks." "Rooms don't change blocks," he said, glancing around the dance studio with the mirrors long gone. "People do. Then rooms that let people change," she said. "Fair?" "Fair." She filmed hands again. Hands writing names, tying bags, leveling shelves, passing mugs that had learned to be steady under weight. She asked Lena one question and got one answer. "Why keep saying the same sentence?" Dara said. "Doesn't it get old?" "It keeps me from shrinking to whatever I feel," Lena said. "Feelings are weather. At your word is a compass." The micro-pantries held their second training at Hope House. Miguel brought a box of fridge thermometers that looked like tiny clocks and argued passionately about nothing that would go viral. "Hang them," he told a row of new volunteers. "Check them. Lie to no one." Lena passed out laminated cards written like hymn lyrics. When to cool, when to call. Marco taught the rope dance to a teenager who rolled her eyes twice, and then admitted it felt good to be in charge of something that kept people from bumping into each other. Evelyn, wearing the title Line Captain on a badge she did not ask for, and now wore like a vow, walked a new team along the building, pointing to the taped X's that respected wheelchairs. The window cracked. 2 fingers. The exits unblocked. "Order is love dressed in rules," she said. Then blushed at her own sentence and pretended to scold a fan. Theo stopped by on his lunch break with drywall dust on his sleeves and a face that looked like a man who had discovered his own competence was not a rumor. He held up his phone to show a photo of the shelf he'd hung perfectly level in his apartment. "I keep making Jesus' room nicer," he joked, tapping his chest twice. "He doesn't complain about my taste." Micah's grief kept teaching without requiring a lesson plan. Some mornings, he lifted a verse like a window and let light in, and some, he closed it fast, not ready for the glare. The church learned to carry him on days he could not carry himself without making him a project. On a Wednesday, he read one sentence over a meal that tasted like humility. John, chapter 10, verse 11. "I am the good shepherd." He didn't underline any part. He let the words do their work. Hope House's lease was up for renewal again. Numbers circled with the dull menace of arithmetic. The landlord, keys singing as always, loved what they did and could not give away a city. 6 months at this rate, she said. "We'll talk again. I like your rice." They nodded. They made a list. They raised boring money in boring ways and felt no shame about it. A letter arrived from the hospital's community office with a check and a note. For the fans. Miguel framed the note and labeled it with a sticky. "Enemy no longer." On a Sunday that pretended to be summer and then remembered spring, the boy from the stairwell sat with his skateboard under the quilt and read aloud for the first time. His voice shook only at the beginning. "Matthew chapter 6, verse 11, he said carefully. "Give us this day our daily bread." He looked up like a kid who just watched a dove decide to land on his shoulder. The room didn't erupt. It breathed, The kind of exhale that makes a space feel warmer without changing the thermostat. After, Lena stood at the door while people dribbled out into a city that had decided to be kind for a few hours. She thought of a verse she hadn't yet said aloud since the river, because she wanted it to belong to more than water. To the boring, to the meetings and the mittens and the mending tables and the medrooms and the mercy. She took a breath and held it for a count like a nurse timing a pulse. Matthew, chapter 6, verse 4. She whispered to herself as she locked the door. Your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Not a transaction, a promise of a presence. She smiled at how far it had traveled to find her. She stepped onto the sidewalk and felt the wind push her hair across her face and then ease, like someone nearer than weather had placed a hand there again. She didn't make a speech to the sky. She said the sentence that kept the rails under her days true and taught her feet how to move when the map got strange. At your word, she said, and walked toward a week she couldn't control, and a king she could trust, spine strong, heart soft, held. April settled in like a friend who knew where the mugs were. The block thawed. The rope stand sagged less in the middle. Kids returned to arguing about whose turn it was to hold the door. An argument that meant belonging. The city sent a notice with a stamp that usually carried bad news. This one didn't. Conditional use permit, renewed for a year, with a note about model practices and an invitation to present at a council training. Miguel taped it to the corkboard under a hand-lettered header, boring triumphs, and everyone laughed because it was true. At the hospital, the state surveyors sent a follow-up that read like relief. Commendations for real-time reconciliation, for empowering pausing, for cross-disciplinary safety culture visible at the bedside. The memo concluded with a sentence that made Lena set the paper down and breathe. We observed a unit telling the truth when tired. She forwarded it to no one. She printed it and tucked it under the medroom plaque, where hands could see it and eyes didn't need to. Theo learned the bus schedule by heart, and then the luxury of not needing it every day. He brought his foreman to Hope House one evening to install a proper threshold. No more winter drafts sneaking under the door. Good bite, he said, testing each screw with the conviction of a man who no longer doubted his own pronouncements. Evelyn wore her line captain badge without a wince and took to carrying a small notebook where she recorded fan placement schemes and the names of people whose stories she refused to turn into labels. She didn't call herself a volunteer. She called herself responsible, and the difference was holy. Marco taught the boy from the stairwell how to set the rope stands without scuffing the floor. Lines make room, he said. People think they're about control. They're about care. Est tu? The boy nodded, like a student who had discovered he was good at a class no one graded. Kenzie began leading a monthly paperwork you can understand night, where discharge instructions lost their fangs. Joy taped a sign to the health corner. Ask anything. Then, in smaller letters, and ask again. Miguel added, we're not rushed. On a Sunday that dressed in green and gold, Hope House held a blessing for work. Nothing fancy, all practical. People brought tools and lunchboxes, pens and scissors, a bandage scissor that had saved 100 panics, a chef's knife that had learned onions as a language. They set them on the table near the quilt, an altar assembled from ordinary labor. Micah stood in the middle with the Bible closed and his hands open. Brothers and sisters, he said, a sentence for our hands. He lifted his eyes. John, chapter 15, verse 5. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. He didn't ask for applause. He asked for abiding. After the amen, a man Lena didn't recognize lingered by the mending table with a baseball cap twisted between his fingers. He had the look of someone rehearsing an exit. Theo saw him first. You need a shelf hung? he guessed. The man blinked, surprised by the assumption of solvable problems. A door, he said. It sticks. We know about doors, Luis answered, already reaching for his bag. The day turned itself like a page. The hospital called with a consult, a unit across campus wanting to borrow the pause. Lena brought the poster and left with a smile she didn't hide. It's yours, she told them. The point was never our name on it. Back home, her father and mother arrived early to set up the mending corner, and he told a bad joke about straight seams that made 3 people groan and 2 people laugh and no one walk away. Near dusk, Dara slipped in, camera at her side. She didn't film. She stood under the quilt and listened to the room move. Fans whirring, rice dropping like soft rain. The cadence of names pronounced carefully. The short, kind sentences of people who had learned how to talk to fear. She scribbled nothing. She took a breath and let it go slow. A family arrived late, shy at the door. A baby wrapped tight. A mother's eyes thin with a night that had not offered sleep. Joy took pressure. Kenzie translated pediatric aftercare into 2 steps and a promise to call in the morning. Miguel checked a cooler temp by habit. Theo fixed a hinge without a sound. Evelyn wrote down a name and drew a little star beside it because she wanted to remember to wave next time. Marco redirected the line with a tilt of his chin that looked like choreography. Micah wiped a table with the concentration of a man who respected the surfaces that hold stories. Lena moved through it all like someone who had found her address. Bedside and safety, ropes and rice. Prayer that sounded like action and action that sounded like prayer. She carried Mateo for a lap so his mother could eat with 2 hands. She paused by the boy from the stairwell and admired the rope angle. She hugged Evelyn with the awkward competence of friends who had learned affection later in life and were catching up. When the hour pushed toward closing, Micah gathered the room with no effort, the way gravity does its quiet worship. He didn't climb the step. He stayed among them. "One line to send us into a week we can't control," he said, Bible closed, eyes up. Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. "Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." He smiled softly. "We're not the light. We're just not hiding it." They stacked chairs. They washed mugs. They laughed. They swept. They opened the door and let the evening in. The city exhaled the way cities do when people have chosen not to be alone. Outside, the wind moved Lena's hair across her cheek and then settled, gentling like a hand she knew without seeing. She thought of everything water had done and everything paper had done. Of screws that bit and seeds that grew. Of rooms that had learned to be brave without being loud. Of a sentence that had carried her through storms and hearings and halls and a river. She didn't make a speech to the sky. She set her palms together because that had become the shape of trusting, and spoke the words that had become the rails under each day. "At your word," she said, "a vow and a way and a home," and turned toward whatever door tomorrow would place in front of her, ready to knock, ready to enter, ready to hold, spine strong, heart soft, held. The council training landed on a Tuesday that smelled like rain rehearsing. Hope House sent 4. Miguel with thermometers in a tote. Joy with cuffs and a binder labeled plain words. Marco with rope stands and a grin that made line management look like magic. And Lena with laminated cards. A small liturgy of sanity. Micah stayed back because the room at home needed a voice to read a sentence over a pot of soup. And also because he had learned that multiplying voices meant trusting silence to work in other rooms. They set up in a municipal hall where echoes wore badges. City staff watched from rows of folding chairs. A council member cleared her throat. "Show us," she said, and the request sounded like permission. Miguel went first. "Hang the thermometer here," he said, hands steady, humor dry. "Check it, write it, obey it. Food is chemistry, not vibes." The room smiled. Joy followed, wrapping cuffs and calling out numbers like weather. "High pressure is storm warning," she said. "You don't ignore sky like that." Marco choreographed a rope line down a hallway no one had planned for dignity and made space appear where there hadn't been any. People murmured the way they do when common sense becomes visible. Lena closed with the card that lived in her pocket. "When to cool, when to call," she said. "No shame, no shortcuts. We tell the truth when we're tired." She didn't quote the plaque. She wore it. Questions came, then stories, then a small cheer when someone realized their neighborhood already had the pieces, just needed a room that let them fit together. After, the council member pulled Lena aside. "You sound like a church without saying it," she said, half joking. Lena smiled. "I am part of one," she answered, not shy. "We hand out soup and sentences." On Saturday, the room that had stayed behind welcomed a new tide of faces. The boy from the stairwell, he finally told them his name, Kenan, leaned his skateboard against the wall and took his place at the rope, precise and proud. Evelyn adjusted fan angles like a conductor and nodded at Kenan's line with the firm satisfaction of a captain. Theo slipped in after work with drywall dust on his sleeves and set down a level like an offering. Luis checked hinges because he couldn't not. Kenzie folded discharge papers into cents. Joy laughed people into taking their pills on time. Anna threaded a needle and mended a pocket so a man could go to an interview without losing his keys. Miguel sipped bad coffee and looked pleased that nothing surprised him. Micah stood in the middle, Bible closed in his hands, eyes up. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "a line for days that look ordinary and secretly save lives." He lifted his gaze. John, chapter 10, verse 11. "I am the good shepherd." He didn't add anything. He didn't have to. The words found the knots and loosened them. After closing, Lena slipped out into a dusk that liked the city enough to linger. Her father waited by the door with a sack of screws and an expression that had learned to be light. "Your mother insists you take dinner," he said, passing a container that smelled like garlic and love. He cleared his throat. "I started a small repair ministry at our place." He looked embarrassed, then not. "We fix squeaky doors. We're starting with ours." She hugged him, the kind that doesn't perform for anyone. "Good bite?" she asked, eyebrow up. He laughed. "The best." At the hospital, the next week carried the quiet drama of competence. A debrief started with "I was wrong," and didn't use the phrase as an alibi. A resident paused a room and found a typo that could have become a scar. The surgeon who once reached for the keyboard before the truth reached him stopped at the medroom plaque and tapped it twice like a confession and a commitment. On a whiteboard in a different unit, a nurse had written in block letters, "We clap for corrections." Someone had drawn a small hand clap beside it. The applause wasn't loud. It was honest. Dara's final story aired without drama. A collage of rooms. Hospital med rooms, pantry corners, mending tables, city hall training. No swelling music, just sentences. It ended on Kenan's hands tightening a rope clasp and Micah's voice, not his face. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 16. "Let your light shine before others." The screen cut to black before the verse finished, as if to say the rest was up to the watchers. One evening, Lena arrived early to Hope House and found the sanctuary washed in the gentle shade of a day that hadn't decided to end. She set mugs in their places, the way she set instruments in a tray before a procedure. Every tool where a hand could find it without thinking. She stood under the quilt and traced the stitched letters. Fear not, little flock, with a fingertip. The fabric was soft with touch, firmer with use. Like them. Evelyn came in with her notebook, paused, then held it up without looking at it. I wrote a thing, she said, cheeks pink. A flow for line and fans. For when I'm not here. Write your name on it, Lena said. Evelyn shook her head. It belongs to the room. She set it on the corkboard and stepped back like someone letting go of a railing she no longer needed. I used to want all the rules to be mine. Now I like them better when they belong to everybody. Order as love, Lena said. Evelyn winced, then grinned. Don't quote me to me. As the room filled, a man hovered by the door, hat in hand, the posture of someone almost ready to ask. Marco saw him, angled the rope, and created a welcome that didn't require explanation. You need a job for 10 minutes? He offered. The man blinked. Always, he said, and stepped into a task that turned him into someone. In the corner, Joy taught an auntie to use a glucometer without fear. Miguel lent a thermometer to a new micropantry across town and said, Return it when you have your own, not before. Kenzie placed a hand on a shoulder without fixing, just anchoring. Anna tied a knot in a bag that would not betray the rice. Theo measured a threshold because he'd learned to see tripping before it happened. Luis rewired a switch and shook his head at the past. Kenan held the rope, eyes on the door, proud as a sentinel. Micah waited until the hum settled and then lifted the Bible in his eyes. One line, he said, for the week ahead, for the doors that stick, for the rooms that need light, for the hands that will make sandwiches and sign charts and fix thresholds and hold children and mend buttons and carry rope, stands down hallways that don't yet know they're holy. He paused, breathed. John, chapter 14, verse 27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. He closed the book. Not as the world gives, as he does. They ate. They laughed. They found the next thing to fix in the person who could do it. When the last mug sat upside down to dry, Lena stood at the threshold because thresholds had become her favorite liturgy. A place between rooms. The honesty of a threshold, admitting both directions matter. The wind lifted hair across her cheek and then gentled, as if a hand she knew kept insisting gently. She didn't plan the next 10 years. She didn't script the next hard hour. She kept the promise she'd made in water and in hallways and in bedrooms and under quilts and in whispered prayers, inside stairwells and beside riverbanks and outside courts and at mending tables and city halls. At your word, she said, and stepped into the night that would always, always need more hands. If this story met you in the storm, pass it on. Like the video, subscribe for more Jesus-centered stories, and share it with a friend who needs hope. Comment I'm held and how we can pray.